Yeah, I know. We're 4 months into 2025 and already I'm uploading this list, finally, after all this time. Many of you are going to be asking, what the hell took me so long? Well, you see, there are two simple answers. Number one, this was always going to be a very large-scale video. Naturally, I would take my time working on this video to make it as good as I envisioned it to be. And number two, these two clowns came along and completely affected my mental health as well as my motivation to continue making videos, especially my motivation to work on this video. But alas, better late than never, as they say. Finally, here is the full, complete list for the top 15 worst movies of 2024. Let me just say, 2024 was an amazing, beautiful year when compared to 2025, and the large amount of stinkers that it put out in terms of movies do not change that. Obviously, yes, there were banger movies in 2025, but there were also a lot of garbage movies. And yet, none of these garbage movies change the fact that I desperately want to go back to 2024 so badly, like you have no idea. But unfortunately, I can't. The only thing I can do now is look back on the worst movies of the year. The worst movies to come out in a better time. But before we do that though, let's go over a few honorable mentions. So our first dishonorable mention goes out to Red One, the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Chris Evans Christmas action comedy thing, where they try to save Christmas, they try to save Santa Claus, who's played by J.K. Simmons, and I still can't believe this is a real movie that exists, honestly. Red One is a movie that I went into knowing it was going to be complete garbage, and yet I thought it would be like the good kind of garbage. The trailers for Red One had some of the worst humor I had ever seen in a movie, but it was like a special kind of bad humor. This movie looked like it would be so unfunny that it would turn around and become funny, but for the wrong reasons. This movie looked like it would be full of the most unfunny MCU-esque humor you would ever experience in your life. And no, I'm not just saying that because Chris Evans is in the movie. Now here's the weird thing with MCU-esque humor, you know, that just happened, he's right behind me, isn't he? You know, like that sort of humor. I don't know how to describe it, but like, sometimes it's fucking insufferable MCU humor. It is insufferable to sit through because of how unfunny it is. And then other times, for whatever reason, it's funny because of how unfunny it is. And so Red One looked like it would be kind of a funny, bad movie. You know, it looks like the same, like, crappy, generic Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson action movie, except it's set in Christmas time, which is unfortunately not enough to differentiate it from the rest. And I gotta be honest, besides the really terrible humor, the movie was just kind of bleh. Like, it's not awful per se, it's obviously not good, it's bad, but like, you know, there's kind of a reason why it's a dishonorable mention. Even if this movie wasn't a dishonorable mention, it would still be extremely high up on the list because, you know, I guess it's watchable. I could sit through this movie a second time. I could still laugh at the jokes, not because they're genuinely funny, but because they're not funny at all. And in a way, I kind of just embrace how ridiculous, how stupid this movie is. This is very clearly not a movie that should be taken seriously. It's a Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson action movie set in Christmas, where he teams up with Chris Evans to save Santa Claus from this evil, like, witch character. I don't know what the hell this movie is, but like, it's a stupid movie, okay? This isn't some deep, artistic, thought-provoking Christopher Nolan movie or anything like that. This isn't an A24 movie about war or depression or whatever. It's a stupid as hell movie that you're very clearly not supposed to take seriously. If you went into this movie expecting it to be some Martin Scorsese tier masterpiece, then well, there's something wrong with you, okay? I don't know what else to tell you. If you go into this movie knowing exactly the kind of movie you're getting into, I guess that makes it slightly less bad. I don't know. But yeah, that's all I have to say for Red One. It's exactly what you would expect from a Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson action Christmas comedy thing. If you ever wanted to watch a movie where Black Adam and Captain America team up together to save Christmas, well, this is your movie right here. And for our second dishonorable mention, we have Disney's Moana 2. Moana 2 is a movie that has no reason to exist at all, or more accurately, it has no reason to exist as a movie. This was originally supposed to be a direct-to-Disney Plus miniseries, and it very much shows. This does not feel like a movie that you're supposed to see in theaters. This doesn't feel like a movie you would watch on the big screen. A movie that you would have to spend money to watch. I don't remember what the hell happens in this movie. It's just extremely forgettable. I'm pretty sure it's like the exact same thing as the first movie, except it's like nowhere near as good as the first movie. None of the songs are memorable in the slightest. They all sound like really generic Disney songs. There are some songs where it's like you listen to them and you could very clearly tell Disney is trying to recapture the success of We Don't Talk About Bruno from Encanto, and they just fail miserably at it. There's no catchy, memorable song like, the first movie had You're Welcome and Shiny and whatever. There's nothing like that. It all just sounds like, derivative, boring Disney songs. To give the movie a little bit of credit, there are a few funny jokes in the movie, particularly from Maui. I'll admit it, yeah, Maui's a funny character. He could be a fun character to watch, and yeah, he's still a fun character to watch in this movie, much like with the first one, so at least the movie has that going for it. Even though Maui barely appears in the movie, he doesn't appear until like the last, he appears like 45 minutes or so, like almost an hour into this 1 hour and 40 minute long movie. But the main problem with this movie is just it's extremely generic and it doesn't work as a movie. This would have been perfectly serviceable as a direct to Disney Plus miniseries. There's no reason for this to have become a movie. I cannot think of any reason as to why Disney would take this and turn it into a movie. Well, actually, no. I could think of a reason. I could think of a very good reason why Disney decided to have Moana 2 become a movie and not a direct-to-Disney Plus series. Again, Moana 2 is a watchable movie, but it's also just, extremely boring and uninteresting. This is the kind of movie that should be watched on Disney Plus as was intended. Of course, being that this is, again, Moana, naturally, that ends up meaning the movie will make $1 billion at the box office, much to my dismay, much to a lot of people's dismay within the animation community. Our third dishonorable mention goes out to Kraven the Hunter. Now, I know some of you might be surprised at the fact that Kraven the Hunter is only a dishonorable mention, especially when compared to a certain other superhero movie that's connected to Kraven the Hunter that is on the list proper. Well, you see, I originally had Kraven the Hunter on this list, but as it turns out, there were too many bad movies that came out in 2024 for me to keep this movie on the list proper, and so I had to move it onto dishonorable mention territory, which I think is for the better because it is very hard for me to go into detail on why this movie is bad, mainly because this movie is really fucking boring. Now, this movie is part of the Sony Spider-Man villain universe. I don't know what the hell they call it. I call it the Sonyverse. That's what I call it. The same universe that gave us Venom and Morbius. These Spider-Man villain movies that for some reason don't have Spider-Man in them. And I've got to say, Kraven the Hunter is easily the worst one of these Sonyverse movies by far. The Venom movies have enough dumb, stupid fun moments in them to make them at least entertaining, even if they're objectively not good movies. And then Morbius, as we all know, the so bad it's good classic that we all know and love. the first movie to make $200 more billion, a movie that quite literally needs no introduction. And then Kraven the Hunter is boring as hell. Kraven the Hunter is considerably more competently made when compared to the other movies in the Sonyverse, and ironically enough, I think it's the worst one because of that. There's nothing funny bad about this movie. It's not entertainingly bad. It's nothing. It's just boring. I barely remember what the hell happens in this movie. There's no haha funny bad moment in this movie or anything like that. Like with Morbius, it's just a waste of time is what it is watching this. There's nothing funny. This movie is R-rated when compared to the other Sonyverse movies. And so you think that would make the movie more funny bad in comparison. There would be like more like dumb fun action scenes in the movie. But no. There aren't really that many action scenes in the movie, and the few that are there are, I guess, a tiny bit fun, but they're not enough to save the movie. The only remotely funny bad thing about this movie is probably the design of the rhino, just because it looks really fucking stupid, but that's not until the very end of the movie, and by that point you're just burnt out and exhausted watching the movie, and you're just desperately waiting for the movie to finally end, so I don't even know if it counts, to be honest. The only remotely funny bad thing in the movie, and it occurs at the very end of the movie. Kraven the Hunter is a train wreck, much like all the other Sonyverse movies, but it's a different, significantly worse kind of train wreck when compared to something like Morbius. There's no entertaining, funny, bad moments in this movie, like with Morbius. There's no ironic enjoyment to be had with Kraven the Hunter. After you finish this movie, you're gonna be craving a movie that's actually good, or at the very least is funny bad. And with that said, let us move on to our fourth and final dishonorable mention. Yes, this is a top 15 list with 4 dishonorable mentions. Had I managed to find one more bad movie that came out in 2024, I could have easily made this a top 20 list instead of a top 15. For better or worse though, I never found that one extra bad movie, and so what you're left with instead is a top 15 list with 4 dishonorable mentions. The fourth and final dishonorable mention goes out to Y2K. Now, I went into this movie expecting it to be fun. I expected this movie to be entertaining. I love the premise for this movie. I think this movie has a great premise. What if the Y2K bug, apocalypse, whatever, actually happened? I think this movie has a great premise, and unfortunately, it just doesn't live up to that potential whatsoever. I don't hate this movie. It's not like a god-awful movie or anything like that. Again, it's in the dishonorable mentions for a reason, but most of the jokes just felt very, like, flat and just not as fun as it should be. I don't know how to elaborate on it. This feels like it should be a really fun movie, and yet it's not. It's not as fun as its premise suggests. There's just something missing from this movie, but I'm not exactly sure what it is that's missing. I feel like this movie is largely carried by its nostalgia bait, I'll admit it. This movie is largely carried just from like the nostalgic aesthetic that it has. I was born in the early 2000s. The Y2K era is generally agreed to have lasted from 1997 up to maybe early 2004. Without going into any further detail, I want to say I was born late into the Y2K era, and even then, looking at like the pop culture stuff, it did give me a sense of nostalgia. Like, it gave me an idea of like, yeah, this was what was popular in the late 90s and early 2000s. Fred Durst of Limp Bizkit is in this movie, and I feel like some of the more fun moments that are in this movie come from him. I feel like this movie overall is just largely carried by its nostalgia bait. You know, it feels like it perfectly captures that late 90s, early 2000s feel. This movie nails its aesthetic perfectly, and it feels like a breath of fresh air as well, having nostalgia for a different time period. This movie has a premise that has a lot of potential to be fun, and it perfectly nails the aesthetic. It perfectly nails the aesthetic of the time period that it's set in. And it's made even better by how much of a breath of fresh air it is, you know? We've been exposed to nothing but 80s nostalgia for a long time. Finally, we have a movie that's nostalgic for a different time period. Finally. This should be a great, fun movie. movie, and yet it's not. There's just something is missing from this movie. I was watching this movie and I was like, I don't like this movie. It's just really weak, the comedy. It is nowhere near as funny as it should be. That's not to say there aren't any fun moments in the movie, because yes, there are fun moments in the movie, but again, they're not enough to save the movie. The overall experience could have been a lot better. It's not the worst movie ever made. Again, dishonorable mention, not on the list proper, but I think it is weak enough for me to put it as a dishonorable mention. I often joke that A24 makes nothing but movies about depression, but then I look at this movie, and then I look at the recently released and similarly weak Death of a Unicorn, and then I look at Has-Been Hotel. I look at these three things and I realize, you know what, maybe it's better if A24 sticks to making movies about depression, because it's very clear that comedy is not their strong point. It's clear that they're not good at making comedy. Everything Everywhere All at Once was a fluke, and even then, there's a lot of A24's trademark sad shit in that movie, so I don't even know if it counts, to be honest. It's funny how I look at A24 as being the reason why we don't get fun movies anymore. They're the reason why fun movies are so highly frowned upon in this day and age, and yet this is clearly an attempt from them to make a fun movie, and it just falls flat. It is nowhere near as fun as it should be. Maybe A24 made this movie as compensation for the fact that they're the reason why we don't get movies like Shaun of the Dead or Napoleon Dynamite anymore. I don't know. If that is the case though, then all I'm gonna say is, A24, stick to the depressing as hell dramas and the disturbing as hell horror movies, please, because it is very obvious you're not good at making comedy. You're just simply not good at making comedy. That is all that I'm going to say. And with all of that said, with the dishonorable mentions out of the way, let us move on to the list proper. These are the top 15 worst movies of 2024. Let us begin. Starting off the list with number 15, you have Harold and the Purple Crayon. Now, this was a movie that I went into knowing it was going to be a bad movie, which will be a surprisingly very common thing for almost all of the movies on this list. Almost every movie that's on this list, I went into knowing they were gonna be bad in some way, shape, or form. Some of these movies I would go out and watch because of the fact that they received terrible reviews, and not despite the fact that they received terrible reviews. And some of these movies, I would watch the trailer for them and I'm like, what the hell is this? This looks like complete garbage, but I'm not gonna lie, I'm really curious as to what this movie is like. And Harold and the Purple Crayon over here falls into the latter category. This movie is based on the old children's book of the same name. I'm sure y'all are familiar with this book. I'm sure y'all have read it in like kindergarten or whatever, maybe as a bedtime story, I don't know. But this is a book that I'm sure y'all are familiar with. And so here we are with a movie adaptation of this classic children's book. And for whatever reason, they chose to make a Harold and the Purple Crayon movie one of those long dead, long irrelevant, long outdated, what if cartoon character was in the real world kind of movies. You know, you think about it in the 2000s and early 2010s, you had stuff like Alvin and the Chipmunks and the Smurfs, Garfield, Yogi Bear, you know, like those kinds of movies. Yet, Harold and the Purple Crayon is like those kinds of movies. Except this didn't come out in like 2009. This came out in 2024. And so that's just one of many things that leads to this being one of the strangest movies I've ever seen. Like, I'm still in disbelief that this is a real movie that exists. Okay, so the decision to have a Harold and the Purple Crayon movie just be one of these generic cartoon character enters the real world movies that's already questionable enough on its own. But what's even more questionable is the fact that it decided to make Harold a fully grown adult in this movie and not a little boy like in the original book. The movie starts off with him as a little boy, and then it very quickly shows him as an adult. And then, as if it wasn't strange enough already, they decided, yeah, let's get Shazam over here. Let's get Zachary Levi to play Harold. Why the hell not? Now, there are a few unironically good things that I will say about this movie. This movie begins and ends with this 2D animated segment where you have like Harold in the cartoony world. He lives in this world that's created entirely with his purple crayon. And I have to admit, these 2D animated moments, they're actually good. They're unironically really good. They're charming. The movie briefly starts off with Harold as a little boy, as they tell you who Harold is, and then it very quickly cuts to Harold as an adult, and you know what? It actually still works when it's 2D animated. It's when it becomes live action, that's when it becomes weird seeing Harold as an adult, but in this animated segment, it still works. It still retains a lot of that charm. It reminds me so much of the Curious George movie from 2006. Like, it has the same energy to it. I'm not gonna lie, I wish the entire movie was like this, because then this would have been like a genuinely charming animated movie. At the same time though, I don't necessarily have a problem with the road that this movie chose to go down. The only other unironically positive thing that I will say about this movie is that it kinda has an interesting reason to have Harold enter the real world. Now, with a lot of these cartoon characters enter the real world movies, they could go two ways. Either they have the cartoon character just be part of the real world from the start, like with Alvin and the Chipmunks or Yogi Bear, or they have the cartoon character enter the real world via magical mumbo jumbo or whatever, like with the Smurfs or Fat Albert. This movie falls into the latter. Well, maybe not really. It leans closer to the latter than to the former, but it does have surprisingly a kind of interesting reason to have Harold enter the real world. So as I mentioned before, Harold lives in a world that's just created entirely by his purple crayon. Everything that exists around him exists because of his purple crayon. And then this eventually leads to Harold wondering, who created him? Who created Harold himself? And this makes him curious. This makes him want to go into the real world and find who created him. And I gotta be honest, that's kind of an interesting, unexpectedly existential reason to have this character enter the real world. In universe, it is an interesting question to ask. Everything that exists in this world around Harold was created with his purple crayon, but then who created Harold himself? I'll give the movie that. That's kind of an interesting reason to have him enter the real world. And then that's it. Those are the only unironically good things I will say about this movie. So Harold enters the real world, and he becomes Zachary Levi, and all of a sudden it is no longer charming seeing Harold as a grown adult man anymore. In the cartoon world, Harold has two best friends, a moose and a porcupine, and so subsequently they enter the real world as well. The moose becomes off-brand Kevin Hart. You could clearly tell they were trying to have this character be like a Kevin Hart-esque character, but I guess they weren't able to get Kevin Hart in this movie. Maybe the budget wouldn't allow it. Maybe Kevin Hart was busy doing a movie that would come out shortly after, foreshadowing for a later movie on this list. I don't know, but whatever the case may be, you look at this character, you watch this character, and you could clearly tell he's trying to be like off-brand Kevin Hart, Kevin Lung, you could say. And then the porcupine becomes this goth punk girl for some reason, and it's so stupid. It is one of the most surreal things I've ever seen, but it's also absolutely hilarious at the same time. So in the real world, there's a mom and her kid, and they genuinely could not be any more generic. They're just the generic real world characters. There is literally nothing interesting to say about them. And yet, their genericness adds to the funny bad nature of this movie. The main villain of this movie is this librarian that wants to have his fantasy novel published, but he's unable to have it published. And so by the end of the movie, he tries to steal Harold's purple crayon so that he could have his fantasy novel become a reality. And it's just really stupid, the whole thing. It's just ridiculous. This is the only movie I could think of that's both so bad it's good and generic as hell at the same time. This movie is funny bad because of how generic it is. It's like an outdated form of generic, you know? This could easily pass as a generic kids movie from 2011. Except this movie didn't come out in 2011. This movie came out in 2024. If this movie had come out alongside Alvin and the Chipmunks and the Smurfs, then it wouldn't be funny bad. It would fit in perfectly. But it's the fact that this movie came out long after Alvin and the Chipmunks, long after the Smurfs, and yet it's on the same level of quality as those two movies. That's what makes it funny bad. My theater experience watching this movie was one of the funniest theater experiences I ever had. It was a nearly empty theater. There were only a few other people there, and it's like, I think they cared even less about this movie than I did. I was probably the only one that was like passionately excited for this movie because it looked so terrible. And so there's just moments in the movie where I was just dying of laughter watching it. Like, this movie has like the generic third act sad moment that a lot of bad kids movies have, and it's like unintentionally hilarious. I felt like I was watching a fever dream. I honest to God, it felt like I was watching a fever dream movie. There's no way this was a real movie that exists. What do you mean this isn't some obscure kids movie from 2009? What do you mean this came out in 2024? There's no way that's true. There's no way that's the case. This is the only funny bad movie on the entire list. Some of the later movies have a few funny bad moments in them, but this is the only movie on the entire list that's like purely so bad it's good from start to finish. And that might be the reason why it's only at number 15. Unfortunately though, it is hard to talk about this movie now in retrospect without bringing up the elephant in the room. Zachary Levi. Now, I'm not sure if this was like known information when I had made my video on Harold and the Purple Crayon a few months back, and if it was, then I just simply didn't know about it until after I made the video. But as it turns out, Zachary Levi is kind of a, no bueno persona, Zachary Levi is like this and like anti-woke conspiracy theorist QAnon MAGA anti-vaxxer person. I would have thought that Zachary Levi being a terrible person would have added to the hilarious, funny, bad, dumpster fire nature of this movie, but nah, not really. It kind of takes away from it, actually, if I were to be honest. It makes it kind of hard to praise this movie ironically as a so bad it's good guilty pleasure. I mean, listen, I understand I always have the option to separate the art from the artist, but I don't know. I don't feel like doing it for this movie. I'm not sure if it's worth it to do it for this movie. On a serious note, though, this sucks for me because I think Shazam is a great movie, and so it's like, it's gonna be hard rewatching it knowing the kind of person that Zachary Levi is. Again, I understand I could separate the art from the artist, and this time that's like unironic, like I'm not making a haha funny joke here. But listen, sometimes it's like I feel conflicted when it comes to like if I want to separate the art from the artist for a certain piece of media or not. I don't want to say that Shazam is like this perfect 10 out of 10 movie or anything like that, but I like the fun, lighthearted nature of it. I like the fun tone that it has. It feels like a pre-MCU superhero movie, it feels like something that would come out alongside the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy or the first two X-Men movies. It feels like a movie that I would have loved watching as a kid if it had come out in the 2000s. Like, I could see myself like rewatching this movie again and again and again as a kid. I wish they made a sequel to this movie, but unfortunately they never did, and they never will. And now it's gonna be hard to rewatch this movie knowing exactly the kind of person that Zachary Levi is. One of the only good movies to come out of the DCEU, and now it's permanently ruined just like that. If the DCEU isn't the most cursed movie franchise of all time, I don't want to know what is. Yet another reason why I hope James Gunn is cooking hard with Superman 2025. So anyways, to wrap things up, Harold and the Purple Crayon is a really funny bad movie. If you're able to look past the fact that Zachary Levi is a terrible person, if you're able to unironically separate the art from the artist for this instance, or better yet, if you think Zachary Levi being a QAnon MAGA person, whatever, adds to the funny bad nature of this movie, then, well, you know, more power to you, more power to you. But damn, it kind of hurts. You know, this could have been like an inside joke for this channel, and you know that's not gonna happen now. I don't think. You know, it was fun while it lasted. You know, the theater experience that I had watching this thing is still gonna be in my head forever. So, you know, it was fun while it lasted. Don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened, as they say. I wanted to make a joke about how this movie is better than Barbie. This is Barbie if it was a good movie, etc., because there are surprisingly a few similarities between the two movies, but I can't do that, unfortunately. Between the fact that Zachary Levi is a right-wing, MAGA, anti-woke person, and the fact that it is near damn impossible to criticize Barbie in any way, regardless of how valid your criticism is, because of people like Zachary Levi, I can't make that joke, unfortunately. Ain't that a shame. Alright, I think we should move on to number 14 now, before I get even more sad at the fact that my favorite movie ever made is now permanently ruined for me. God damn. Okay, so number 14 is a movie that I'm sure all of y'all are gonna be like, oh come on man, really? This is such an easy target. This is low-hanging fruit, this movie. Are you really gonna go and bash it? What were you expecting from it? And yes, okay, maybe this movie is low-hanging fruit, but number one, this is my list, not your list. I could do whatever I want with my list. And number two, this movie is only at number 14, so it doesn't matter at the end of the day. If this movie was in the bottom 5, then that would be a completely different story. Then I would understand where you're coming from. But it's only at number 14. So yes, even though this movie is low-hanging fruit, it's not that low. Number 14 is Despicable Me 4. Again, I get it. I don't know what I was expecting from the 4th, technically 6th movie in the Despicable Me franchise. But still, I went to go and see this movie because I had nothing better to do. My family was gonna go and see it, and so I figured, fine, I might as well go and watch it as well. Now, excluding the 2 Minions movies, let's look back on the first 3 Despicable Me movies. I will still stand by my belief that the first Despicable Me is a genuinely really good movie. I remember a few years ago, I was at a family gathering, and I guess someone decided to put it on. I think it was on Netflix at the time, I don't know. And at first I thought to myself, ugh, not this stupid baby movie. God, the Minions are so cringy. That's like boomer crap right there. God, no. You know, that sort of thing. And then, it didn't take long before I found myself rewatching the movie. And I was genuinely surprised to see that the first movie had aged really well. I mean, prior to this, I did see people say that, like, in retrospect, the first movie was the only good Illumination movie, but, you know, I didn't expect it to be this good still. I thought that Illumination's current reputation would affect the way that I would look at this movie, but no. I started watching the movie and it's like, you know, I felt nostalgic for it. It was still a funny movie, and it was surprisingly a lot more heartfelt than I remembered, which again, I would have never expected given Illumination's reputation for making mostly soulless animated movies. Despicable Me turns 15 this year. No, I'm not sorry for making you feel old, and to this day, it still stands as Illumination's best movie. That's kind of sad, honestly. Imagine being this brand new up-and-coming animation studio, and you finally put out your first ever animated movie, and it ends up being an unexpectedly massive hit. All of your future movies would go on to make even more money. They would go on to perform even better than that first movie of yours. And yet, despite that, almost 15 years later, and quality-wise, you peaked with that first movie. You will most likely never reach the same highs that you reached with your first ever movie almost 15 years ago. Damn. And then Despicable Me 2 and Despicable Me 3 are massive downgrades in comparison. But even then, they still have their moments. There are still funny moments from time to time in these two movies, and there is still a little bit of that heart that's retained from the first movie in these two movies. But overall, I would say they're both a downgrade from the first movie. And yet, despite that though, at least these two movies felt like they had a reason to exist. Despicable Me 4 in comparison just feels like this movie exists just for the sake of existing. They decided to make a Despicable Me 4 just for the sake of making a Despicable Me 4. It's like, why not? We can make it. We're able to make it. We might as well make it. I don't know how much sense this is going to make, but there is something weirdly direct to video about this movie. Like, I don't know what it is, but like, this is obviously not a direct to video movie, and yet it just kind of has like those sort of vibes to it. You think of like the direct to video Disney sequels from the 90s and 2000s, and it's like, I don't know, it's mainly with like the storyline, it's mainly with like the ideas that are in this movie that give it this direct-to-video feel. You watch this movie and it's very clear watching it that they're running out of ideas. They're running out of new things to do with these characters. In 2010, the possibilities were endless when it came to what they could do with these characters. In 2024, there are very few possibilities remaining. Stuff like Gru having a son in this movie, just like the superhero minions, the general plot where it's like Gru and his family have to move out of their house and move to like a new community and start a new life. I don't know what it is, it feels like a direct-to-video sequel in terms of like its storyline. Just the vibe I get from it gives off that cheap, low-budget, direct-to-video sequel to Despicable Me vibe, even though this is obviously not a cheap, low-budget, direct-to-video sequel. I think it's also like the villain as well. Now, I don't go into the Despicable Me movies expecting deep, complex villains or anything like that, but there's something about this villain that just makes him feel different from the first three movies' villains. I think it's mainly like the gimmick that he has. You know, the first movie has Vector, and I guess Vector doesn't really have much of a gimmick. I mean, he's nerdy, but like, I don't know if that really counts. I suppose maybe it doesn't really matter for Vector because, you know, this was the first movie, so I guess it's fine. You know, even if Vector doesn't have a gimmick, you know, he's still a fun character to watch, and, you know, that's probably what matters most at the end of the day. And then the second movie has the Mexican wrestler, and then the third movie has the former child star that's obsessed with 80s pop culture. And so, in the 7-year gap between the third Despicable Me and the fourth Despicable Me, you're kind of left wondering what's going to be the villain for this next movie. And so what you end up getting is this comparatively less creative cockroach-themed villain. Again, I don't expect amazing, complex villains from Despicable Me, but there's something about this character that just makes him feel extra generic when compared to the villains of the first three movies. And that kind of adds to the direct-to-video feel that this movie has. He also barely appears in the movie, so there's that as well. Cockroach Guy also has a wife, and she barely does anything in this movie. You could cut her out of this movie and I'm pretty sure nothing would change at all. I'm only briefly bringing her up because, Jesus Christ, this might be the worst character design I've ever seen in a movie. But overall though, this is a movie that just kind of fails to justify its existence. Again, the second and third Despicable Me movies felt like they had a reason to exist. Maybe the first Minions movie felt like it had a reason to exist. I'm not sure about Minions 2, but with Despicable Me 4, it just blatantly feels like it has no reason to exist at all. It exists just for the sake of existing. It exists just because they have the ability to make this movie. They could make it, and so they decided to make it. That being said though, this movie does have a few funny moments in it. I know I'm going to lose my animation is cinema privileges for saying this, but sometimes the Minions are funny. I'm sorry. Sometimes I like it when the Minions say banana. You know, it makes me laugh. It makes me go ha 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 ha. Forgive me, Guillermo, for I have sinned. What would Walt say about this if he were still alive? Yes, sometimes the Minions make me laugh in this movie, okay? I'm sorry. I think it's like when it's in small doses, the Minions can be funny. and I think that's part of what made the first movie good. The Minions only appeared occasionally. The occasional comedic relief for the movie. They were used sparingly, and that's what helped make them funny in the first movie. And then because of the massive popularity that they received between the first movie and the second movie, they started getting a lot more attention going forward into the second movie. They started getting more screen time. They started becoming more of a focus. And then despite all of this, in small doses, they can be funny, the Minions. There are a few moments where they can be funny. I'm pretty sure I've officially entered my middle-aged white Facebook mom phase by defending the Minions and claiming that they're funny. But oh well, I suppose it was gonna happen inevitably. I gotta admit something. I saw Minions 2 when it came out, The Rise of Gru, whatever. My family was gonna go and see it, and initially I didn't feel like going with them, but then I decided, what the hell, why not? I have nothing better to do. And I don't know if it was because I was watching it with my family, but I found Minions 2 to be kind of funny. I don't know if I want to call it good, but it was funny from time to time. I laughed at this movie more than I would have expected from Minions 2. If I rewatch this movie, it's probably not going to be all that funny, but I kind of enjoyed it at first. It was like, hey, this is, I went out of the theater and I was like, oh, you know what? That was actually kind of okay. That was pretty decent for Illumination standards. Seeing the Minions become the face of this franchise, though, is a massive shame if you ask me, because Gru is genuinely a funny character as well. Most of the funny moments that are in this movie come from Gru. I'll admit it still feels very direct to video, but there are a few moments where I laughed at Gru trying to be a good dad for his son. The thing is though, this is mostly for the first half of the movie, is when I was laughing. By the second half, I was like, yeah, this is your standard Illumination fare. Again, it's funny in small doses, and then eventually that funniness kind of just goes away, and you're just dealing with your typical Illumination movie. It never gets to a point where it's like awful or unwatchable or anything like that. You could sit through this movie. It is watchable, but then it's like it kind of loses that surprising funny quality that it had in its first half. The only really notable thing about this movie is that there's a scene in the end where Gru and the cockroach guy are in prison, and they're having a singing contest where they're singing Everybody Wants to Rule the World by Tears for Fear. And so you just have all of the villains from the previous movies appear, the first 3 Despicable Me movies, the 2 Minion movies, etc. And then there's a scene where, I kid you not, Vector is flossing, and friendly reminder, this movie came out in 2024. Flossing died around 2021, 2022, maybe even earlier than that, I don't know. But yeah, there you go. The animation is cinema. So to wrap things up, no, Despicable Me 4 isn't really that good of a movie, but at the same time, what the were you expecting from what is technically the 6th Despicable Me movie? Even though this movie feels a lot more tired out, it doesn't really have much of a reason to exist, and watching it, you could very clearly tell they're running out of ideas for what to do with these characters. This is still a money-making franchise. Minion fatigue hasn't kicked in yet. This movie made almost $1 billion at the box office, and it will stand as one of the highest-grossing movies of 2024. Clearly, audiences are not tired of the Minions. They're not tired of Gru. They're not tired of any of these characters. And you know what? I gotta be real. I kind of respect Illumination for this. They're making this stuff and they're getting the bag for it. I gotta respect that a little bit, I've mentioned this before, but Illumination has a formula, and it might not necessarily be a good formula, but it's a highly successful formula. It keeps generating money for them. Animation is cinema, motherfuckers are probably jealous that they can't get $969 million, Another L for the animation is cinema crowd. Another W for the middle-aged white Facebook moms. Hell yeah, baby, we stay winning. Yeah, very quickly, I just want to say, this movie has one of the hardest posters I've ever seen from a movie. There's no reason for this to go as hard as it does, and yet it goes unnecessarily hard. And yeah, that's about it. Let's move on, shall we? Number 13 is, for once on this list, not a movie for babies. It is the remake, reboot, I don't know, thing for The Crow. Now I'm gonna start this off by saying that I went into this movie completely blind. I have never seen the original Crow from 1994 with Brandon Lee in it. As a matter of fact, the only thing that I know about this movie is the tragedy that happened with Brandon Lee behind the scenes of this movie. Besides that, I've never seen this movie. I'm sure it's a great movie, but I've never seen it. One thing that I do know about this movie is that this is apparently the only good Crow movie. This movie got 3 subsequent sequels, none of which are very good. 2 of them were direct-to-video if I'm correct. And then almost 20 years after the last Crow movie, we would get this new rebooted version. Now this movie was in development hell for a long time. Apparently development on this movie started all the way back in December of 2008. And so over 15 years later, this movie would finally see the light of day. This movie would finally be coming out in 2024. And let me just tell y'all something, this does not feel like a 2024 movie. This feels like a movie that would come out around like 2016 or 2017. Like you watch this movie and it has this like really like try-hard edgy feel to it that fits in perfectly with how things were in 2016 and 2017. But it just feels embarrassing to have a movie like this come out in 2024. You look at the chemistry between the 2 main characters of the movie, Eric and Shelley, played by Bill Skarsgård and FKA Twigs respectively, and it's going to remind you so much of Jared Leto's Joker and Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn from that one 2016 DC movie that I wish I could say the name of it in this video, but I don't want to risk getting demonetized. And no, I'm not calling the movie on a live squad either. I have standards, damn it. I have standards. Actually, this whole movie just reminds me a lot of that 2016 DC movie. This was the first of several movies on this list that I chose to rewatch in order to jog my memory. I got like 10 to 15 minutes into this movie and then I had to pause it because the chemistry between these 2 characters reminds me so much of Jared Leto's Joker and Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn. Immediately I began looking up, all of those really cringy, like, deep memes or whatever. Those, like, edgy, like, romantic memes that people would make that, like, oh, these characters are so deep and whatever. These, like, extremely cringy, unintentionally funny memes that people would be making with the Joker and Harley Quinn from that 2016 DC movie. And just imagine an alternate universe where this movie came out in, like, 2017 or so. People would be making these kinds of memes with Eric and Shelley. I could just imagine a timeline where that happened. I'm sure Bill Skarsgård tried his best to save this movie. I'm sure he tried his best to make this movie good, but it is impossible for me to look at his version of The Crow, like even like physically, it looks like Jared Leto's Joker. It reminds me so much of Jared Leto's Joker, to the point where I'm surprised they didn't just get Jared Leto to play the Crow in this movie. We could have gotten the Holy Trinity, guys. We could have gotten the Holy Trinity. And that's a damn shame if you ask me. Now, I will say that this movie can be funny bad at moments. The try-hard edginess of this movie can be funny bad at first. It is funny looking at the I'm 14 and this is deep bullcrap that's just in this movie. The 2017 SoundCloud emo rap aesthetic that it has, even though this movie came out in 2024. It adds to the funny bad nature of this movie, but unfortunately, you get used to it very quickly. Eventually, the funny bad nature of how try-hard edgy this movie is, the parallels that you can make between this movie and that one 2016 DC movie, they stop being funny, and what you're ultimately left with is a movie that's just mostly boring to sit through. So the main villain of this movie is this old rich guy who I guess his whole thing is like he made a deal with the devil where he would sacrifice innocent people and send them to hell, and in return he would gain immortality. He would be able to live forever. And so there's a few scenes in this movie where you see him sacrificing these people. He goes up to the victim's ear, he just lounges to the victim's ear, and he starts whispering some spooky mumbo jumbo or whatever into the person's ear, and then that possesses the victim and it makes them do something that ends their life. And every time it happens, it is so f***ing stupid. It is so ridiculous and goofy looking, and it's like, it's crazy to think the movie wants me to take this seriously, because you watch it and it's like so stupid the way that it's done. It is impossible to take it seriously, and that adds to the funny bad nature that this movie can occasionally have. And I say occasionally again because he only does this 3 times in the entire movie and that's it. At the same time though, maybe it's better that he doesn't do it a lot in this movie because, you know, the try-hard edginess of this movie is funny at first and then it becomes stale after a while. So I could see this whole like ear possession thing, you know, it starts off funny and then it just becomes really stale. You know, it's not as funny when he does it the 15th time around. Shelley ends up getting sent to a rehab center where she meets Eric. And upon rewatch, it's around here where this movie not only starts to remind me of that DC movie from 2016 with Jared Leto and Margot Robbie in it, but it also starts reminding me of another movie that came out shortly after The Crow that we're also going to be talking about on this list. When I went to go and see this other movie, I don't know how I didn't notice the similarities between the two movies, but when I got around to rewatching The Crow very recently, I was like, holy shit, this movie has so much in common, so much more in common than I initially expected with this other movie. So which movie does The Crow remind me of that we're going to be talking about later on this list? You're gonna have to wait and see in order to find out. I'm sorry. So then I guess, you know, there's like these people that work for the old rich guy and like they're trying to look for Shelley, and this causes Shelley and Eric to break out together, and while they're breaking out and running away from the rehab center, there's a Joy Division song that's playing in the background. And now Joy Division, for those who don't know, they were a late 70s post-punk gothic rock band. A lot of their songs have a very gloomy, depressing tone to them, which there's like an extra layer of that gets added when you find out what happened to the lead singer of the band, Ian Curtis. You find out about what he had to go through. I would love to go into more detail about this, but I can't because number one, I don't want this video to become unnecessarily grim, and number two, I want to stay on topic. The genuinely depressing nature of Joy Division's music does not fit in at all with the trashy 2017 aesthetic that this movie has. Maybe it would fit the original 1994 movie, but it sure as hell doesn't fit the 2017 emo rap aesthetic that this movie has, despite the fact that, again, this movie came out in 2024, and then a good chunk of the movie is just these two together. It's really cringy and uncomfortable to watch. You're watching it, it's just extremely awkward watching it. I don't know how else to describe it. Eventually, the two of them get caught by the bad guys who suffocate them in a plastic bag. Shelley gets sent down to hell while Eric ends up in this, I don't know, this other world, I guess. And it is here where Eric becomes the Crow, destined to save Shelley and stop this evil rich guy and his henchmen. Most of the movie is just really slow and dull. There are a few action scenes here and there, and yeah, they can be fun to watch, but unfortunately they're mostly pretty short. However, there is one scene in this movie that I want to give special attention to. Near the end of the movie, Eric, as the Crow, goes to this opera, believing that the evil rich guy is there attending the opera. Now, the building is full of the villain's bodyguards, the villain's henchmen, whatever. And so what you end up getting is a solid 10 to 15 minutes, give or take, where you have the Crow going around the building, murdering all of these henchmen, John Wick style, while this opera is going on. And it's like the music is synced up to the murders as well. So it's like the music intensifies during a particularly brutal murder. And then eventually it culminates with Eric walking up to the front of the opera stage, holding up 2 decapitated heads and throwing them to the audience as they run away screaming. It's bloody, it's violent, and it's fucking amazing. This is the one great moment in the entire movie. I'm not even saying this as like a haha, ironic, so bad it's good thing or anything like that. No, this isn't funny bad. This is a genuinely amazing moment in an otherwise dull, unremarkable movie. This scene is so good that it almost makes you forget about how bad the rest of the movie is in comparison. You're watching this non-stop slaughter that's going on, and you're thinking, damn, this movie is peak, this movie is Kino, and then you remember what the rest of this movie is like, and so you change your mind. You're like, no, this movie actually sucks, it's garbage, never mind. But at least it has one great scene in it, you know, it has that going for it. This movie starts off funny bad with how try-hard edgy it is, and then eventually the try-hard edginess of the movie, you get used to it, and so it stops being funny bad, and you're just bored watching the movie. You're bored for the most part watching this, and then out of nowhere, near the end of the movie, you get this incredible scene that's genuinely a blast to watch. And then this is not where the movie ends. There's still a solid 15 to 20 minutes left of the movie. And then it's like, on the one hand, it sucks that the final few minutes of the movie, you know, you go back to the same garbage quality that the movie has had for the most part, never again reaching the same highs that it reached during the opera scene. But on the other hand, there's only 15 or so minutes left of the movie, so, you know, there's not really much of a point in complaining about it, you know? I read something that the ending of this movie was changed from the original 1994 movie. This movie, I guess, ends with Eric sacrificing himself so that Shelley could still be alive, and I guess this is supposed to tease a sequel, I don't know, but given the fact that this movie did very poorly critically and commercially, I think it's safe to say, yeah, that sequel is never gonna happen. There are enough things about The Crow to put it up this high on the list. There are a few funny bad moments in it, some of the smaller scale action scenes are fun to watch, and the opera scene is a masterpiece in of itself, but the rest of the movie is just extremely dull to sit through. After a while, the try-hard edginess of this movie, the many parallels this movie has to that DC movie from 2016, it stops being funny. You stop laughing at how much these two characters have in common with Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn and Jared Leto's Joker. But you know what? I don't think any of the remaining 12 movies on this list have a scene in them that comes close to being as good as the opera scene, which is why this movie is only at number 13. With all of that said, let us move on to number 12. Number 12 is a movie that came out fairly early into 2024, and yet I would not watch it until the very end of the year. Prior to watching it, I had heard many things about how this movie was really bad apparently, but I wanted to give it a chance anyways. Needless to say, yeah, the movie is pretty f***ing bad. Y'all were not lying. Number 12 is Kung Fu Panda 4. I'm not sure how much of a hot take this really is, but yes, I genuinely, unironically believe that Kung Fu Panda 4 is worse than Despicable Me 4, because at least with Despicable Me 4, you know exactly what you're getting into. A fourth Despicable Me movie being not that good is not surprising in the slightest, but a fourth Kung Fu Panda movie being not that good, that's a lot more shocking in comparison. And the reason for that is because of how amazing the first two Kung Fu Panda movies were. If you looked at these two movies completely on their own, you would say, yeah, Kung Fu Panda 4 is better, Despicable Me 4 is worse. But when you add in the previous installments of these respective franchises, that's when you notice, no, Kung Fu Panda 4 is actually a worse movie than Despicable Me 4. Now, I spent an entire day binge watching all 4 Kung Fu Panda movies just to jog my memory and also to prepare myself for this 4th movie. I had a feeling that if I had not rewatched the first 3 movies, I would probably be a lot more favorable towards this movie. I truly wouldn't grasp the badness of this movie until I rewatched the earlier movies. You know, it's kind of like with Incredibles 2, where on its own, Incredibles 2 is a fine movie, but then you get reminded of how much of a masterpiece Incredibles 1 is, and then that just makes Incredibles 2 even worse for you. I spent all day watching all 4 of these movies, and I was just amazed at how much this series fell off. You know, people keep talking about how the Shrek series fell off after Shrek 2, but if anything, I think the Kung Fu Panda series' fall off should be studied as well. How do you go from 2 masterpieces to a pretty good movie to this? What the hell happened? Okay, so part of what makes the Kung Fu Panda movies so beloved is the fact that they're not what you would expect. You look at Kung Fu Panda, you hear the name Kung Fu Panda, and you expect this to be like a generic kids movie, and that's it. A dumb generic kids movie. Maybe it's not terrible necessarily, but it's nothing to write home about either. A dumb kids movie that's full of a lot of like lowbrow haha panda is fat jokes. Jack Black Panda is fat and he eats a lot of food and it's funny because it's fat. You know, you would expect the movie to be full of that kind of humor. And yes, those kinds of jokes are in the movie. But to your surprise, the movie does have emotional scenes in it as well. The first 2 movies have genuinely hard-hitting, powerful moments that have no reason to be as good as they are, especially for a movie called Kung Fu Panda. What makes the 3rd movie inferior to the first 2 movies is the fact that it's a lot more heavy with the comedy, no pun intended. Now, I'm not saying that the Kung Fu Panda movies are unfunny or anything like that, but the comedy is easily the weakest of the 3 aspects for these movies when compared to the action scenes and the emotional scenes. So when you make the 3rd movie more focused on the comedy when compared to the action and the emotion, it's not as good, I'm sorry. The movie overdoes it with the whole haha pandas are fat jokes, to the point where eventually it just becomes unfunny very quickly. The 3rd movie does make up for it though. It still has the great action scenes that the first 2 movies had, and it still has the emotional core that the first 2 movies had. It's not there as much, but it is still there, and that's completely absent in Kung Fu Panda 4. You look at Kung Fu Panda 1 and you compare it to Kung Fu Panda 4 and it's like the difference is night and day. Kung Fu Panda 1 is a masterpiece that people thought would be a generic kids movie. Kung Fu Panda 4 is a generic kids movie. The fact that the Furious 5 aren't in this movie at all, except for like at the very end of the movie, during the credits, that's the only time they appear, is a very questionable decision for the movie to make. I hadn't watched Kung Fu Panda 3 in forever, and so I thought it would be like, maybe there was something in that movie that would explain why they're absent in the next movie. But I rewatched Kung Fu Panda 3 and it's like, no, there's no reason at all. The Furious 5 are absent from Kung Fu Panda 4, seemingly for the sake of being absent. You still have Po, of course, but then joining him is this new character, Awkwafina Fox. No, I don't care what her name is. And so most of the movie focuses on Po and Awkwafina Fox trying to get to this city in order to stop the main villain of the movie, the Chameleon. A villain who has the potential to be interesting, but unfortunately is largely uninteresting. The Chameleon has a cool concept. She's able to shapeshift into anyone and anything. Throughout the movie, she could be seen shapeshifting into Tai Lung, the villain of the first movie, making people think that Tai Lung had returned and he's still alive. But unfortunately, she doesn't utilize this shapeshifting shapeshift ability all that much. She doesn't really appear all that much in the movie, and you don't really see her shapeshift at all besides a few occasions. She doesn't have the interesting backstory or motives that the villains of the first 3 Kung Fu Panda movies had. And I just find that to be a massive shame because she genuinely has a lot of potential to be interesting like the villains of the first 3 movies. Watching this movie will make you do nothing but appreciate how good the first 3 movies were. It will make you appreciate how surprisingly emotional the first 2 movies were. The first movie had Master Oogway's death. The second movie had Poe's childhood flashback where he remembers his mom dying trying to protect him. The fourth movie over here has this really generic third act sad moment where Poe finds out, plot twist, Awkwafina Fox is working for the Chameleon, and so the two of them split up, and it's like, it's so comedically generic when compared to in the first 2 movies. 5 minutes later, they're back together, so it's just, it doesn't have the same emotional weight that the first 2 movies had. Even the third movie had it as well. Kung Fu Panda 4 is primarily a comedy. It's not a very funny comedy, though. There are only 3 times in this movie where I laughed, and they're all at moments that weren't even supposed to be funny. The first time I laughed was the Mr. Beast cameo. Yes, Mr. Beast has a cameo in this movie. I remember people were talking about it before the movie came out, and reminder, this movie came out before all of the allegations about Mr. Beast came out, and I had completely forgotten about that until I watched this movie for the first time, and when I saw the scene that he was in, it was like, it caught me off guard, like a f***ing Five Nights at Freddy's jump scare. I suddenly remembered, oh yeah, Mr. Beast is in this movie for some reason. The second time I laughed watching this movie was in a scene where, I kid you not, Poe just name drops the movie. There's a scene in the movie where Poe refers to himself as the Kung Fu Panda, and in that exact moment I knew, yeah, this franchise has run its course. It's such a forced title drop that it ended up making me laugh. And then shortly after that, there's a chase sequence which, for whatever reason, has an oriental version of Crazy Train by Ozzy Osbourne playing in the background, and that's the third time I laughed at this movie. I was paying close attention to the background music and I was like, wait, this sounds like Crazy Train. And then I listened to it a few seconds more and it's like, wait, it is Crazy Train, what the hell? I know it's not a new thing for animated kids movies to have like licensed songs in them, but for them to like have a version made that like fits the movie tonally is definitely interesting. I've never seen that before. Instead of just playing the original Crazy Train, they're playing like an oriental version, which, I mean, you know, it's different at least. I'll give them credit for that, but it's just really surreal when you watch the movie for the first time. But besides that though, this movie just leaves you thinking, you know, maybe it's okay to say goodbye to these characters. A franchise that once felt fresh and unique is instead just really generic and predictable. There's this whole thing in the movie's plot where Poe is forced to retire from being the Dragon Warrior, someone else has to become the next Dragon Warrior, and it's like, okay, sure, if the movie wants to do that, then fine, go ahead. The problem is, the moment Poe meets Awkwafina Fox, it becomes extremely obvious that, yeah, she's gonna be the next Dragon Warrior. How convenient. The character that's introduced in this movie, the newcomer to this franchise, yeah, she can become the next Dragon Warrior. Wouldn't it make more sense if it was one of the Furious Five? Oh wait, I forgot, the Furious Five aren't in this movie for some damn reason. DreamWorks is usually the GOAT when it comes to making animated sequels, but damn, this is a really bad movie. It kinda makes me scared for Shrek 5 in 2026. It kinda makes me hope we never get Madagascar 4, honestly. And yet I have to remind myself that this could potentially just be a bad fluke for DreamWorks. Kung Fu Panda 4 might be the worst DreamWorks sequel, or at the very least the worst DreamWorks sequel actually made by DreamWorks themselves, foreshadowing for a later movie on this list. but it's still leagues better than the worst Disney sequel, Ralph Breaks the Internet, so I have to give it credit for that. And with all of that said, let us move on to number 11. Number 11 is a movie that you might be very surprised to see is this high up on the list. But trust me when I say that I would unironically rather watch this movie over the remaining 10 movies that are on this list, even if this movie is significantly worse quality-wise. Number 11 goes to the one, the only Madam Web. Yes, arguably the most ridiculed movie of 2024, and it's not even in the bottom 10. It's not even in the bottom 5. That's how bad some of the movies on this list are, when this is only at number 11. In my defense, though, I rewatched this movie for this list, and I was amazed by how incompetent, how poorly made this movie was, but I found it to be hilarious in retrospect. When I first watched this movie in theaters, I didn't find it to be all that funny bad. I guess it was a little bit funny bad, but it wasn't enough to save it. It wasn't like Morbius, where it was just a hilarious dumpster fire. This one was like, it's a dumpster fire as well, but it's not necessarily hilarious. Only upon a rewatch did I find, this movie is genuinely hilarious in how trash it is. I have never seen a movie this poorly made, this incompetent before in my life. A movie that has an absolutely stupid storyline filled to the brim with plot holes, just really terrible acting, and the craziest thing is that this is a proper movie. Like, this is a proper Hollywood blockbuster movie. When people think of infamous bad movies, they think of stuff like The Room and Birdemic and every Neil Breen movie, and it's like, what makes those different is those are all like weird obscure as hell movies that are made by complete nobodies. They're not from any major film studio. They have little to no budgets. They're just these small, stupid, obscure things. It's not exactly surprising that they turned out the way that they did. The Room is the most famous bad movie ever made. It's made by a bunch of unknown people. There is not a single famous person attached to The Room. It's not from any major film studio. The budget of this movie is presumably extremely low. And so you watch the final product and it's like, it's unsurprising with how amateur it is. It's not surprising at all. I know it feels weird to call The Room an indie movie, but it kind of is. It's not indie in the same way A24 is indie, but it's indie nonetheless. And then Madam Web, in comparison, this is a big budget Hollywood movie. Well, I don't want to say it has like a huge budget, but it's definitely not like a low budget indie film or anything like that. It definitely doesn't have the budget of, say, a Neil Breen movie. Let's agree on that. This movie is from a major film studio. This movie is part of a franchise that's based on one of the most famous characters in all of media, even if said character, for whatever reason, doesn't appear in any of these movies. And I don't want to say that this movie has extremely huge names attached to it or anything like that, but it definitely has fairly big names attached to it, like Dakota Johnson and Sydney Sweeney. And somehow this thing is so incompetently made. It's like almost on par with The Room in terms of its incompetence, except it's more professionally made as well. Like, this had a budget, there was a bigger team, this is like a Hollywood movie. So for it to be on par with The Room quality-wise is just incredible. I want to try and keep these segments as short as I possibly can, but I think I'm gonna have to go a lot deeper as to why this movie is bad, because I have so much stuff to say about this movie. This might be a long segment when compared to some of the other movies I want to talk about on this list, so just bear with me. I made a video on this movie when it came out, and I gotta admit, I don't really like how that video turned out. I was mostly just recollecting my memories from when I watched the movie in theaters. I didn't have a cam rip at the time. I don't think there was a cam rip available for me to like base my opinions on. I just had to like remember everything from my head. Well, now I own the damn movie in my possession, and now I have the freedom to watch it whenever I want, so I have no excuse now. The movie begins with two characters, a woman who we later find out is the mother of the movie's protagonist, Cassie, and Ezekiel, the villain of the movie. We all know how the line goes, he was in the Amazon doing research on spiders with my mom before she died, or however it goes. The two of them are trying to find this spider that's like apparently really powerful and could do all kinds of good things for people. I don't know. They end up finding the spider, only for Ezekiel to shoot Cassie's mom and take the spider all for himself. Cassie's mom is like, no, don't take the spider. We could do so many amazing things with it. We could help so many people out. And Ezekiel's like, nah, I don't care. Nobody helped me out when my family was starving. And I kid you not, that's the only sort of backstory the movie gives you for why Ezekiel over here is evil. This seemingly important detail is instead just regulated to a throwaway line at the very beginning of the movie that is never acknowledged ever again for the rest of the movie. Now, I don't have a problem with a movie having a villain that's just evil for the sake of being evil. Not every villain has to have some deep, complex backstory explaining why they're evil. It's okay to have a villain in a movie that's just evil for the sake of being evil. But unfortunately, Jack Horner, this guy is not. You either give your villain a backstory explaining why he's evil, or you don't. You don't include a quick throwaway line at the very beginning of the movie that's never elaborated on ever again for the rest of the movie. It's never further explored. It's just never acknowledged again, and you just expect me to be okay with it? No. Nobody helped my family when they were starving, okay? Why were your family starving? Why didn't people help out your family when they were starving? Did you grow up broke, homeless? Were you living in poverty? What the hell happened? Again, this is a seemingly important detail that is, for whatever reason, never acknowledged again for the rest of the movie. And it just gives you a brief taste of how amazing the writing for this movie is. And this is the first of many times I will remind y'all that this isn't some weird, obscure, low-budget piece of crap made by complete nobodies like The Room or Fateful Findings or anything like that. No. This is a professionally made Hollywood blockbuster. This is a proper Hollywood movie that has fairly big names attached to it. Just keep that in mind. This is from a major film studio. This is supposed to be connected to one of the most famous characters of all time, Spider-Man. Just keep that in mind. So then Ezekiel runs away with the spider, leaving Cassie's mom to die before this Spider-Man tribe appears. Okay, sure. They take her to this cave. A spider bites Cassie's mom, which I guess gives Cassie powers. I don't know. And then they deliver Cassie. Cassie is born just at the same time her mom dies. Now this beginning segment takes place in 1973, and so we fast forward 30 years later to 2003, where we see Cassie as an adult now working as a paramedic in New York City. And just like that, even more questions come rolling in. We get even more of the movie's fantastic writing. The movie doesn't explain to you what happened with Cassie between 1973 when she was born and 2003, where we see her now as an adult. Besides her mom, there was no other family member that was there in that Amazon search. Where is Cassie's dad in all of this? The movie makes a big deal about Cassie and her mom, but it never acknowledges her dad once. What happened to Cassie's dad? Is he dead as well? Is Ezekiel Cassie's dad? That would be a pretty good plot twist, I'm not gonna lie. As a matter of fact, it. That's my headcanon for this movie, because at least then that would make the plot of this movie make a tiny bit more sense. Did the Spider-Man tribe raise her? No, that can't be the case. There's a scene later on in the movie where she meets the Spider-Man tribe properly as an adult, and she clearly has no recollection of these people. There's a scene also late into the movie where Cassie reveals that she grew up in a foster home, and there you have it. There's another seemingly important plot detail that's just regulated to being a quick throwaway line that is very easy to forget about. Okay, so Cassie grew up in a foster home. Fine. Presumably the Spider-Man tribe took Cassie to a foster home as a baby where they would raise her for all her life. That still doesn't explain why the movie starts off in the Amazon before suddenly cutting to New York City. Now, admittedly, I'm too lazy to pull up a map in order to confirm this, but I'm 99% sure that New York City and the Amazon are extremely f***ing far away from each other, and yet the movie just treats it like they're next door neighbors. Like, yeah, it's just a simple 5-minute drive to get from New York City to the Amazon. It's nothing big. Oh yeah, for whatever reason, Cassie just owns a lot of her mother's old stuff, you know, journals and photographs and whatnot. And it's like, why the hell does she have this stuff? How does she have this stuff? When the Spider-Man tribe sent Cassie away to a foster home in New York City, which, as we all know, is extremely close to the Amazon, did they conveniently make sure to include all of her mom's belongings as well, and expect the people running this foster home to know what the f*** any of this stuff is and what it has to do with their newest whatever? Furthermore, how the hell does Cassie even know that this stuff belongs to her mom? She has literally no way of knowing that this stuff belongs to her mom. This could very well be just some random woman's research that she just owns in her possession for some reason. Reminder, Cassie was born the exact moment her mom died. She has literally no way of knowing that any of this stuff belongs to her. There's a scene later on to the movie where Cassie acknowledges, yeah, my mom died giving birth to me. So it's like, how do you know that any of this stuff belonged to your mom if you have literally no memories of your mom at all? Furthermore, how the hell do you even know that your mom died giving birth to you in the first place? Besides you and your mom, the only other people that were there were the Spider-Man tribe, and you don't remember their existence until much later on into the movie, for plot convenience. Why does the movie try to give Ezekiel a backstory explaining why he's evil, only to then just completely abandon it and never acknowledge it again for the rest of the movie? Why is this other seemingly important detail that Cassie grew up in a foster home again just regulated to a quick throwaway line that's easy to ignore? Why does the movie treat the Amazon and New York City like they're right next to each other? Why does Cassie own her mom's old research stuff on spiders? And furthermore, how the hell does she even know that this stuff belonged to her mom? How does she know that this isn't just some random woman's research on spiders that she owns? How does Cassie know that her mom died giving birth to her? She was literally just born when her mom died. She should have zero memories of her birth happening. It's not like there was any other family member that was there to witness the birth happening, so there is no way for her to know this. How does she know that her mom died giving birth to her? Why is Sydney Sweeney hot? All of these questions, and none of them will ever be answered. 'Tis a shame, if you ask me. This movie genuinely has some of the worst writing I think I've seen in any movie ever, and it's made even worse by the fact that, again, this isn't some weird, obscure, low-budget movie like The Room. No, this is a more proper movie, I guess you could say. Again, it's from a major film studio, and it's from a major franchise. It's attached. This movie is attached to a famous character. And I know that sometimes there are movies like Jaws: The Revenge and Batman and Robin that are, they're based on famous characters, but they're also really bad movies. But I sincerely doubt that they are as incompetently made as this movie. And yet, despite how incompetently made this movie is, despite the many issues with its plot, I'm not angry at this movie. I find this movie to be absolutely f***ing hilarious because of how badly made it is. The fact that this is a big budget Hollywood movie makes this even funnier. Ezekiel might genuinely be the stupidest villain I think I've ever seen in any movie ever. Like, it's not even just the whole nobody helped me when my family was starving thing that's just brought up at the beginning of the movie and then never further explored for the rest of the movie. Just his main motives, what he spends most of the movie doing, is so ridiculously stupid. It's hard for me to take this guy seriously. Throughout the movie, he tries to track down these 3 specific girls, mainly because he frequently gets these hallucinations of these girls murdering him in the future. The movie never explains why the girls try to murder him. It just shows the girls murdering Ezekiel in the future. And so Ezekiel tries to find these girls beforehand so that he could murder them before they could murder him. He ends up getting the entire security system for New York City just to track down these 3 girls, and it's so ridiculous. It is impossible for me to take it seriously, and it just adds to the hilariously bad nature of this movie. Oh yeah, I want to bring up as well, I don't know what it is, but like, for whatever reason, during certain scenes where Ezekiel talks, it's like, for whatever reason, the audio is out of sync. It sounds like it's obvious that's like they dubbed over the take, like I think it's called ADR, I'm not sure. But sometimes there are certain scenes where he talks and it's like the mouth movement does not align with what he's saying. It's like off sync. I noticed this when I first watched the movie in theaters, and I thought, okay, maybe this is like a weird glitch from the theater, I'm not sure, maybe they'll fix it. And then later on, I rewatched this movie via my Blu-ray copy that I proudly own, and it's the same thing still. There's no attempt, no effort to fix it at all. Why they didn't bother to fix it, I have no idea. So anyways, with Cassie, her whole thing is, thanks to the spider biting her mom while she was giving birth to Cassie, her whole thing is that she could be able to briefly see into the future. She sees something happen in the future, and so she's given a brief window of time to prevent that thing from happening. So there's a scene where she goes to a subway and she conveniently finds the 3 girls there, and then she gets these brief glimpses into the future of Ezekiel coming in this like Spider-Man-esque costume and murdering the girls. And so she tries to get the girls away from Ezekiel safely. Oh yeah, as it turns out, conveniently, Cassie met these girls before. At the beginning of the movie, it is shown that, yeah, you know, like she meets Sydney Sweeney's character at like a hospital. One of the girls lives in the same apartment complex as her. That sort of thing. Great writing. Very convenient. Am I right, folks? Am I right? Now, this is a superhero movie, but it doesn't feel like one. You watch this movie and it's very easy to forget that you're watching a superhero movie. It's very easy to forget that you're watching something that's kind of related to Spider-Man, which that's not necessarily a bad thing. Logan is a superhero movie that barely feels like a superhero movie. You watch this movie and it's very easy to forget that you're watching a movie based on Wolverine, a movie that's based on the X-Men, and yet Logan is a masterpiece despite that. Logan is an amazing movie despite that. Well, actually, no, not despite that. Logan is amazing because it doesn't feel like a superhero movie. So what makes this movie different? Well, there's the simple fact that there's almost no action at all that happens in this movie. Nothing interesting happens in the movie. I don't know how much sense this is gonna make, but there is nothing interesting that happens in this movie, and yet the movie is not boring because of how funny bad it is. But if you looked at it from the plot, if you just looked at what was going on, you realize, yeah, this is just a giant nothing burger. There are no action scenes, no fight scenes, anything like that in this movie. There are 2 scenes where Cassie runs over Ezekiel with a car, and that's it. Those are the closest you get to action scenes in the movie. If you watch the trailers for this movie, you would see that the girls are all suited up in superhero outfits and whatnot. Yeah, guess what? That only happens 2 times in the damn movie, and that's it. The first time is during the aforementioned dream sequence where Ezekiel envisions himself being murdered by these girls. And the second time is at the end of the movie in what is very clearly supposed to be sequel baiting. Sequel baiting for a sequel that is never going to happen because of how badly this movie performed critically and commercially. This movie was indeed supposed to start a franchise, but that franchise is never going to happen because of how the movie turned out. On the one hand, I'm glad that we're not getting any more garbage, but on the other hand, this movie was at least funny garbage, and we may never get anything like it again. As far as big budget Hollywood movies go, this might be the worst one quality-wise. I think of something like The Last Airbender, and it's like, I've never seen The Last Airbender. I don't know if I would ever watch The Last Airbender, but The Last Airbender, from what I've seen of it, looks like a far more competently made, professionally made movie than Madam Web. This movie is on par with, like, The Room, I want to say, except it's honestly worse in a way, because, again, The Room is just this weird, low-budget movie made by and starring complete nobodies from over 20 years beforehand. The fact that Madam Web is somehow on par with The Room is so hilariously pathetic. I can genuinely see this movie becoming the next big so bad it's good movie, if it hasn't already. I'm sorry for how long this segment is when compared to the other movies that are on this list, but some of the movies that are on this list I'm gonna have to go into great detail about when it comes to explaining why they're bad, and Madam Web is one of those movies. Like, I could very easily explain why Despicable Me 4 is bad in simply 5 minutes, but Madam Web, it's gonna take some time for me to explain. I'm gonna have to go into detail on why this movie is bad. And that right there, my friends, is my cue to move on to number 10. Number 10 is a movie that genuinely hurts me to put on this list because I wanted this movie to be a masterpiece. I thought this movie looked amazing, and I thought this was going to be one of the best movies of 2024. And yet, well, here we are instead. Number 10 is the pretentiously named Joker Folie à Deux, which from here on out will be referred to as Joker 2 for short. You're welcome. Now, Joker was a movie that arguably didn't need a sequel. There was no reason to give this movie a sequel. The movie had a deliberately ambiguous ending, leaving us to wonder what will happen to Arthur Fleck now. What will happen to this version of the Joker? It worked because it was left up to our imaginations. There wasn't a definitive answer, and there was never going to be a definitive answer. It was up to our imaginations what would happen to Arthur Fleck, what would happen to this version of the Joker. And then this movie ended up being a fucking massive success at the box office, $1 billion movie. And I guess that convinced Todd Phillips, director of both Joker movies, to make a sequel. Now, I was very skeptical about whether this movie needed to exist or not, but then all of that skepticism went away with the trailers. I thought this movie looked amazing from the trailers. Every time I was at the movies and I saw the trailer for this movie play beforehand, I was like, oh hell yeah, this movie's gonna be a fucking masterpiece. And then I saw the early reviews for this movie were negative, and I thought, okay, well, the first Joker didn't do all that successful with critics. Critics were very mixed, polarized towards this movie, but audiences generally loved it, so maybe the same thing could happen with this movie. Except no, audiences hated this movie as well. I'm too lazy to check if this is still the case, but at some point, both the audience score and the critic score for this movie on Rotten Tomatoes, they were both at 32%. A perfectly balanced 32%, which I had never seen anything like that before. And then the movie came out and I watched it, and I gotta say, holy shit. This is not the worst movie of 2024, as evident by the fact that it's only at number 10, but it is easily the most disappointing movie of 2024. Every other movie on this list I went into knowing it was going to be bad in some way. this is the only movie where I went into it hoping it would be a good movie. In some aspects, that makes this movie worse than some of the later ranked movies, but I don't care. I'm gonna try and keep this segment as brief as I possibly can, considering the fact that I have made not one, not two, but 3 videos on this movie. So if you want to see me go into more detail on why this movie is bad, then you can always go and check out those videos. I'm gonna try and keep this segment brief, but I can't promise that it'll be brief, because there is a lot to unpack when it comes to why this movie is bad. This is a movie where virtually nothing happens in it. This movie has almost no semblance of a plot. Half of this movie is a musical, and the other half is a courtroom drama. And unfortunately, it is not a good courtroom drama, and it sure as hell isn't a good musical. Yeah, we're just getting the elephant in the room out of the way. I don't know why the hell they decided to make this movie a musical. It just gives you such tonal whiplash when you look at the way the first movie was. It's like the gritty 1970s feel that the first movie had is completely gone in this second movie, and the musical numbers are a big reason why that's the case. It feels like I'm watching a parody of the first movie, and not a sequel to the first movie. If the first Joker was the original movie adaptation of Pink Floyd's The Wall, then Joker 2 over here is the nostalgia critic review of Pink Floyd's The Wall. That's the best way I could describe it. Most of the musical numbers as well are fantasy sequences, meaning they don't actually happen. And that is going to be a pretty big thing that I will go into more detail about later on. But something that I will say is that the set designs for some of these musical numbers, they are really good. I like the way that some of these musical numbers look. I think the set design can be really good for some of these musical numbers. It obviously doesn't justify the fact that this movie is a musical, but you know, at least the musical numbers are nice to look at. I like the way they look. The set designs are nice. Something else that I will also praise this movie for is Joaquin Phoenix is fantastic as the titular Joker, as Arthur Fleck, much like in the first movie. As a matter of fact, his performance is so good that it almost makes you forget about how shitty this movie is. You're watching this movie and you're not even paying attention to like the context or anything like that. You're just so focused on how great of a delivery Joaquin Phoenix is giving. It almost makes you forget, why do people hate this movie? Why do people think this movie is bad? And then 2 minutes later, the movie hits you with a fucking musical number, and then you get reminded, oh yeah, that's why people hate this movie. Never mind then. But yeah, Joaquin Phoenix is fantastic in this movie, much like in the first movie, and I wish I could say the same thing about Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn, but unfortunately she's barely in the movie, and her character barely does anything at all. The whole marketing for this movie focuses on the fact that this version of the Joker finally has his own Harley Quinn, and the movie chooses to do nothing with that. The chemistry between these two characters are virtually non-existent. The only times you ever see these characters together are during the fantasy sequence musical numbers. In the actual real-world scenes, they're not there together. Very rarely are they together. For those that went into this movie expecting it to be a Bonnie and Clyde story with these two characters, yeah, you're gonna be really disappointed. This movie is supposed to be a commentary, I suppose, on certain people that liked the first Joker for the wrong reasons. I'm sure you're well aware that there are characters from certain movies and TV shows that people like them even though they're not supposed to like them. People look up to Patrick Bateman and Tyler Durden, even though the point of both American Psycho and Fight Club is that they're terrible people. These are both terrible characters that should not be looked up to. And Joaquin Phoenix's version of the Joker unfortunately joined that club. One could argue that every version of the Joker is part of this club. You know, you could say that Heath Ledger's version is part of this club as well. But I'd say it's especially Joaquin Phoenix's version that is part of this club, where it's like, you missed the point if you like this character. This movie is supposed to criticize the incel "we live in a society" fans of the first movie. There are people that like this movie for the wrong reasons, and it almost makes me scared to talk about why I think the first movie is really good. Sometimes it's hard to criticize a movie, even if it's a genuinely bad movie, simply because the wrong people hate it. And other times, it's hard to praise a movie, even if it is a good movie, simply because the wrong people like it. It's sad, but it happens, and there's nothing you can do about it. The problem is, this movie treats everyone that liked the first Joker like they're these incel, we live in a society people that like the first movie for the wrong reasons. This movie acts as a giant you to everyone, and I mean everyone that likes the first Joker, regardless of why they like it. I've seen a lot of people speculate that this movie was made to be deliberately unsatisfying. The people who went into this expecting a Bonnie and Clyde story with these two characters, they end up getting nothing like that at all. The thing is, though, it is entirely possible to give people what they want. You can have these two characters going around committing crimes. You can have a Bonnie and Clyde story with these two characters and also act as a criticism towards the incel fans of the first movie, the people that like the first movie for the wrong reasons. You can simultaneously do both of those things, and yet the movie chooses to not do that for some reason. Just blindly assume that everyone that likes the first Joker is a we live in a society incel. The problem is not the fact that they're calling out the incel fans. The problem is that they're treating everyone that liked the first movie like they're the incel fans, and that's not true at all. And it's just a really boring movie as well. It's just such an unsatisfying movie, made for literally nobody. Who is this movie made for? I think that's a question that I'm going to ask a lot of times throughout this list. Who is this movie made for? If you liked the first Joker, you're gonna hate this movie. If you hated the first Joker, then, well, why the hell would you watch this movie? Outside of morbid curiosity, I guess. This movie completely undoes everything that was established in the first Joker, so maybe if you hate the first Joker, you could like this movie because of that, but I don't know. I've never seen anyone say they hate the first Joker but love this movie. People that love the first Joker hate this movie, and people that hate the first Joker hate this movie as well. Who the hell is this movie made for? Earlier on this list, I talked about The Crow, and I brought up how, upon a rewatch, this movie eerily reminded me of another movie that I would cover later on this list. Joker 2 is that movie. I was rewatching The Crow, and I was amazed by how similar these two movies were. At least at the very beginning they were. The beginning of The Crow takes place in this rehab center, while Joker 2 primarily takes place in Arkham Asylum. Rehab center, asylum, tomato, you know, they're similar enough. They're like prison adjacent places, whatever. They have enough similarities, I don't care. You have these two people, a man and a woman. They meet together and they almost immediately fall in love. The Crow has FKA Twigs, a female musician. Joker 2 has Lady Gaga, a female musician. There's a scene where these two try and escape from their prison. In The Crow's case, they succeed. In Joker 2's case, they fail. That's pretty much where the similarities between the two movies end. To give The Crow a little bit of credit, at least there's stuff that happens in it. At least it could be funny because of how try-hard edgy it is. And at least it has the opera scene, which is an absolute f***ing masterpiece of a scene. Joker 2 doesn't have anything like that. It's just a waste of time is what it is. Not to mention, both of these movies came out not that far apart from each other. The Crow came out at the end of August, while Joker 2 came out at the beginning of October. I don't know how I watched this movie in theaters and not notice the similarities between it and The Crow. Not only that, but I am also amazed at the fact that this random movie was somehow able to remind me of two completely different excellent but very terrible movies with the Joker and Harley Quinn in them. How the hell was The Crow able to do that? How? Oh yeah, speaking of which, when I reviewed The Crow, I briefly referenced all of those really cringy memes that people would make with Jared Leto's Joker and Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn. Yeah, alternate universe where Joker 2 was a good movie. Do you guys think people would be making these kinds of memes with Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga? Maybe Todd Phillips intentionally made this movie bad so that his versions of the Joker and Harley Quinn didn't have to have these cringy memes made with them. If that's the case, then, well, I can't really blame him for making the movie this way. I can't blame him at all. At the same time, though, if that wasn't the case, then, yeah, this movie was a massive flop at the box office. It had a huge budget of $200 million, and it does not feel like a $200 million budget movie. The first movie had a budget of, I believe, $50 million, and it's like, there's more stuff that happens in it. It feels a lot more like, it doesn't feel like a $200 million movie necessarily, but it feels more like one than this movie. When you make a deliberately unsatisfying movie that ultimately pleases nobody, do not be surprised if that movie ends up flopping at the box office. Do not expect this movie to become a billion-dollar smash hit. That is all that I'm going to say. I'm not sure what the bigger joke is. This movie, or the fact that we thought this movie would be good. Let us move on. Number 9 is a movie that I'm sure y'all were expecting me to talk about at some point on this list, and well, here it is. I'm finally talking about it. Maybe I'm putting this movie too high up, but I don't care. I genuinely don't think this movie is as bad as some of the later movies on this list, so here it is at number 9. Even though it's not the worst movie ever made, it is arguably the most unnecessary movie ever made. Number 9 is Mufasa, the Lion King. I had to sit down and watch this movie twice. The first time, I didn't even finish the movie because it was so unbelievably boring. Well, also that and the fact that the cam rip that I had available was not very good. So here we are now, months later, we finally have a proper official HD release of the movie. I knew right from the get-go I would be talking about this movie in some way on this list, whether it be a dishonorable mention or it's on the list proper. So I took 2 hours out of my day to watch this movie once and for all. And Jesus Christ, this movie is a slog to get through. The entire time I'm sitting down watching this movie, I'm just thinking to myself, why should I care about any of this? Why should I consider any of this canon to the events of the original Lion King? I don't know if this is relevant information or not, but I have surprisingly never seen the 2019 Lion King remake. I don't think I need to though, because I've already seen the good version of the Lion King, and I'll stick with that, thank you very much. So here we are now with a prequel to the Lion King that answers all of the questions that were on none of our minds. How did Mufasa become the Lion King? Why is Scar evil? Important questions that are on all of our minds whenever we watch the original 1994 classic. And yet, despite everything, there's a small part of me that's convinced, maybe this movie could work. Maybe this movie actually isn't the most unnecessary movie ever made. Maybe the problem with this movie is not the idea behind it, but rather it's the execution. Unsurprisingly, much like the 2019 Lion King remake, this movie has the same photorealistic style. Now, I've never seen the 2019 Lion King remake as mentioned before, but one of the biggest criticisms I've heard people give it is that everything looks too realistic. None of the characters have any sort of emotion. None of the characters convey any sort of facial emotion when compared to in the original movie. I guess they kind of fixed that in this movie. The characters are a little bit more expressive, but it's still far from a good thing because it does not clash well with the photorealistic art style. So now we go from a National Geographic documentary to the uncanny valley. How the hell does this movie from 2024 somehow have CGI that's on par with those live-action Scooby-Doo movies from the early 2000s? Actually, no, those movies are a goddamn national treasure. I shouldn't be disrespecting them like that. I apologize. I'm not one of those weirdos that make a big deal about 2D animation versus 3D animation, but this is a movie that would have greatly benefited from being 2D animated. For one thing, it would have helped make the audiences more engaged with this storyline. It would make it easier for people to care about what goes on in this movie, to have them consider it canon to the lore of the Lion King, and it would also allow for me to tell which character is which. Now, obviously, there are a lot of lions in this movie. What a shocker. There are a lot of lions in this movie about lions. The thing is, because of the photorealistic art style that the movie has, it is near damn impossible to tell who is who. This could have been prevented if the movie retained the 2D animation style that the original Lion King had. Actually, no, it. Maybe it's somehow possible to have this in like 3D, have this in CGI. I don't see why not. As long as it looks cartoony, that allows for the audience to tell, which character is which. When you have everything be photorealistic, it is really hard to tell who is who. There's a scene early on into the movie where you have Mufasa as a cub alongside his parents, and it is very easy to mistake this as being, this is Simba as a cub, and then you have Mufasa right there. Even though that's not the case, Mufasa is the cub. Simba doesn't exist in this part of the movie. You wouldn't know that though, because of the photorealistic animation. When you have every character look virtually identical to each other, it makes it harder to care about any of these characters, and subsequently it makes it harder to engage with the storyline, with what's going on in this movie. Oh yeah, this movie is also told as a flashback by Rafiki to Kiara. Yes, Kiara from Lion King 2. Simba barely appears in the movie for better or worse. He has to go somewhere, I don't know, it's something stupid. And so he leaves Rafiki to babysit Kiara alongside Timon and Pumbaa. Rafiki is the one that tells the story, the main story with Mufasa and Scar and whatever. While Timon and Pumbaa occasionally appear, the movie cuts back to present day where we have Timon and Pumbaa as the obvious comedic relief. Except they are not funny in the slightest. They are unbelievably annoying in every scene that they're in. Every time these two characters appeared on screen, I had to pause the movie and remind myself that people willingly chose to go and see this movie instead of Sonic Adventure 2 in movie form. That is ridiculous to me. Oh yeah, you want to know the reason Scar becomes a bad guy? Yeah, it's because of a girl. I'm not kidding, it's because of a girl. So midway into the movie, Mufasa and Scar meet this third girl lion. I don't know her name, I don't care either. And as it turns out, Scar has a crush on her. But it turns out the girl lion doesn't want Scar, she wants Mufasa. And so Scar becomes jealous and whatever, and so he teams up with the villain lions. So there you have it. There's the origin story for Scar, explaining why he's evil. The next time you watch the original Lion King, and you just look at how cool of a villain Scar is, just remember all of this is because of a girl. Man, what the are they doing at Disney for real? What the hell, man? Despite everything I've brought up, the main problem that this movie has is that it is so unbelievably boring to sit through. I will never not be amazed at the fact that somehow this movie made more money than Sonic the Hedgehog 3, which opened on the same day. That's the power of Disney, adults, for you. Never underestimate the power of millennials who still think Disney is a company worth respecting in this day and age just because they made a really good movie about lions over 30 years ago. Disney was good back in 1994. That means they're still good in 2025, because that's clearly how it works. While we're on the subject of creative bankruptcy, Let's move on to number 8, shall we? Number 8 is a movie that I'm sure y'all are gonna look at me and you're gonna be like, bro, why the hell did you watch this movie? What compelled you to watch this movie? And I promise y'all, I can explain, okay? I can explain. Number 8 is the Mean Girls remake. Now, the original Mean Girls from 2004 needs no introduction. It is one of the most iconic comedies of the 2000s, if not of all time. It is an integral part of 2000s pop culture, and it is one of the most quotable movies of all time. It is a classic in every sense of the word. So it's no surprise that Hollywood, being Hollywood, decides, you know what? Let's take this beloved movie that doesn't need to be remade and let's remake it. And let's also make it a musical just to add insult to injury. Well, actually, no. I should be a little bit more fair. This movie isn't really much of a remake of the original Mean Girls, so much so as it is an adaptation of the Broadway musical. And yes, there was a Broadway musical based on Mean Girls. So at the very least, this movie kind of has a reason to be a musical, which is more than I could say for Joker 2. Unfortunately though, there is no reason at all, I repeat, no reason at all, for this movie to exist. As far as movie remakes go, I genuinely cannot think of a movie that has even less of a reason to exist. This movie gives you no reason to watch it over the original 2004 movie. There are no advantages to watching this movie over the original 2004 movie. This movie fails to convince you that, yeah, this is the definitive version of Mean Girls that you should watch. Forget about that original 2004 version. This isn't even like a Willy Wonka situation where it's like you have the original movie and you have the remake, and it's like there are enough differences between the two movies to help justify both of their existences. And so it's like the two movies can coexist together. You can have two alternate versions of the same storyline, and there are enough differences to justify both of their existences. This movie is not like that at all. This movie is inferior to the original movie in almost every single way. I understand that maybe I shouldn't rank this movie below some of the previous movies that I've talked about on this list. I mean, the movie's not really that low on the list. It is smack dab in the middle after all. There are 7 movies that are better than this, but there are also 7 movies that are worse than this. At the same time though, I feel like maybe I shouldn't rank this movie below something like Madam Web, because Madam Web is a far worse movie quality-wise than Mean Girls, and yet I think this movie is worse just because of what it represents. I think this movie is worse just because of what it stands for. Madam Web is a poorly made movie. Simple as that. Nothing more, nothing less. Mean Girls perfectly showcases how creatively bankrupt Hollywood is. Take a movie that has no reason to be remade, a movie that's already perfectly fine as is, and just remake it again, and then give the audience no reason at all to watch it over the original movie. If you've seen the original Mean Girls, why the hell would you want to watch this new version? Because of the songs? Well, I'm sure you could easily find the original songs from the Broadway show online, and even then, these songs aren't even all that good to begin with. They're the most generic TikTok pop songs I've ever heard in my life. It's TikTok bait is what it is. You know the term Oscar bait? Yeah, well, allow me to coin a new term, TikTok bait. You hear a song and it's like extremely obvious that this song was only made just to go viral on TikTok. It's like industry plants, but for a song and not an artist. Arguably, the whole movie is TikTok bait because the movie's a lot more modernized in a way. The movie does feature different scenes of like this TikTok-esque app, and it is the most how do you do fellow kids thing I've ever seen in my life. And it will do nothing but completely date this movie even more than it already was beforehand. It's interesting to me how the original Mean Girls is such a quintessentially 2004 movie. It's a movie that could have only come out in 2004, not in 2003, not in 2005, no, in 2004. And yet, despite feeling very 2004, the movie still manages to be timeless. This movie, in comparison, feels very 2024, and it's like, you just know in the future, in the nearby future, this movie will come across as outdated. Arguably, it already is outdated. I remember reading something that this movie was supposed to be a Paramount Plus exclusive, but eventually decided to change it to a theatrical release. And I think this movie would have worked better as a streaming movie. Because I'm sorry, but I just find it ridiculous, the idea of like going to spend money at a movie theater. Spending money buying the tickets, buying the food, whatever, just for what is essentially an inferior version of an old movie. And once again, this movie gives you no reason to watch it over the original Mean Girls. For those wondering, no, I did not go and see this movie when it came out in theaters, thankfully. You might be wondering why I watched this movie in the first place, and the reason why is because around the latter half of 2024, I came up with like this watch list where I would go out of my way to try and watch some of the movies that came out earlier into the year that I missed out on. And the Mean Girls remake was one of those movies. Now, I think this might have affected the way that I look at this movie, but similarly to Kung Fu Panda 4, I decided to watch the original Mean Girls shortly before this remake. I think I've seen the original Mean Girls before, like an extremely long time ago, but I have very little memories of it. So, you know, a refresher didn't hurt. Much like with Kung Fu Panda 4, I probably wouldn't have noticed how terrible and unnecessary this Mean Girls remake is unless I watched the original movie first. It's like I watched the original Mean Girls, and then like 2 nights later I watched the remake, and it's like I felt like I was watching the same movie twice. Certain scenes, certain lines of dialogue from the original movie were just repeated word for word in this movie, and it just made me question even more, why does this movie exist? Who was asking for this movie? I don't know how much sense this is going to make, but just bear with me on this. As I mentioned earlier before, the original Mean Girls has a reputation for being one of the most quotable movies of all time. Naturally, this remake contains a lot of the iconic quotes that the original movie had. The thing is, though, I don't know how I could be able to elaborate on this. Every time these iconic quotes are said in this movie, it just feels very forced. I don't know why. In the original movie, it comes across as being natural. In this movie, every iconic quote that's said, it feels like forced nostalgia bait. It doesn't come off as natural or authentic like in the original movie. Think of any iconic quote from the original movie. It's October 3rd. On Wednesdays we wear pink. Stop trying to make fetch happen. It's not gonna happen. These quotes are in the remake. And it's like, for whatever reason, just the way that they feel in this remake, it comes across like the movie wants you to point at the screen and be like, look guys, look, they said the line, they said the funny meme line. Isn't that crazy, guys? Isn't that crazy? It's nostalgia bait in its purest form. Again, I'm not sure how much sense this is gonna make, but that's just the way that I look at it. Now, 2024 was a year that gave us a lot, and I mean a lot, of different box office flops. Most of the movies that are on this list were box office flops. Some of these movies were released to streaming, a select few of these movies were successful, and then you have this movie, which is just a dilemma. This movie only made about $100 million or so at the box office, but the budget for this movie was, I believe, only $30-something million. After all, this was originally supposed to be a streaming movie. Now, I'm not all too familiar with how box office stuff works for me to say, like, is this a success? Is this a flop? I don't know. But maybe I'm a little bit overreacting when it comes to this movie and just the idea of such a movie existing. Remake a movie that doesn't need to be remade. Modernize a movie that doesn't need to be modernized. Once again, I'm going to ask, who the hell asked for this movie? But at the same time, maybe I shouldn't treat this movie like it was a $1 billion success or anything like that. This movie's box office was relatively low, although I guess maybe it was a mild success given the low budget that the movie had. I'm not sure. It's very debatable. And either way, it doesn't really matter because most people have already forgotten about this movie's existence. The original Mean Girls from 2004 will live on as a comedy classic, but this movie is just whatever. Who the f needed this? Why did this movie need to happen? Who was asking for this movie? Mean Girls 2024, the most pointless movie remake not made by Disney. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I'm not looking forward to the super bad musical remake that's gonna come out in 2027. Maybe then the movie will finally live up to its name. Number 7 is... okay, I can't think of any jokes for this part. Number 7 is Megalopolis. Finally, for the first time on this list, we have a completely original movie. Not a sequel, not a prequel, not a remake, not in any way attached to an already established famous character, nothing like that. For the first time on this list, we have a movie that is purely original. We have a movie that just has a completely original, completely unique story. And lo and behold, the movie is fucking hot garbage. I gotta admit, this movie does feel a little bit like a curveball, you know? Throughout most of this list, we've talked about the easy target, crappy blockbuster movies like Madam Web and Mufasa and whatever, and then here we are talking about this artsy-fartsy, pretentious, we live in a society movie. Well, actually, no, I can't even tell if this is we live in a society or not. If you know anything about Megalopolis, you would know that this movie's plot is all over the fucking place. It is near damn impossible for me to tell you what this movie is about. There is so much that happens in this movie's plot that it's like, it's impossible. Like, you know, sometimes there are moments in the movie where it's like I get a vague understanding of what's going on, and then most of the time it's just like overshadowed by a bunch of like random bullcrap happening. So the movie takes place in New Rome, I guess, which is like kind of like New York City and Rome combined, I don't know. And you have the two main characters of the movie, Adam Driver's character and Giancarlo Esposito's character. Adam Driver's character is named Caesar, while Giancarlo Esposito's character is named Cicero. Ah yes, let's give the two main characters of this movie strikingly similar names, because clearly this movie's storyline isn't confusing enough already. Caesar has this like magical element or whatever called Megalon, which he intends to use to build Megalopolis, which is supposed to be this like dream magical utopia or whatever. However, Cicero, who is also the mayor of New Rome, is against this idea. Cicero also has a daughter named, I think, Julie, something adjacent to that. And she ends up falling in love with Caesar, much to Cicero's dismay. And that right there is the most that I could tell you about this movie's plot. That is an extremely vague summary of what this movie's about. That's like 3% of the movie's plot I just gave you, because there is so much that goes on in this movie that's like trying to describe what happens in this movie is goddamn impossible. There's just certain details about this movie, certain things that happen in this movie that just, they happen for the sake of happening. Caesar has the ability to stop time. He only does it in a few scenes and that's it, and not once in the entire movie is it ever an important plot factor. Not once is it ever important to the movie that Caesar has the ability to stop time. It's just a cool thing that he's able to do, and that's it. There's also this like subplot where it's like Caesar had a wife and I guess he murdered her for reasons, I don't know. I think it's like the movie goes back and forth on like, did he do it? Did he not do it? I don't know. It's so confusing, this movie's plot. There's a scene where alleged footage resurfaces of Caesar doing, to put this in the tamest way possible, something bad to an underage girl. A girl that's like like supposedly 16 years old. And then as it turns out, no, actually she's 23 years old. She's not 16 years old. And then as it also turns out, the footage was fake. It was a deep fake or something like that. It's like a big plot point in the movie for like 5 minutes, and then it's resolved, and then it's never brought up again for the rest of the movie. And you're just left wondering, okay, what the was the point of that? Why was that in the movie? I'm guessing it's supposed to be like a statement about cancel culture or something like that, which is real fucking ironic considering who directed this movie, but I'll get into that later on. There's just all kinds of shit that goes on in this movie, and it's like sometimes it doesn't have any purpose in the movie. I remember when this movie came out, there were people that were trying to defend it by claiming that it's an original story. You can't complain that every movie that comes out nowadays is a sequel and a remake and then completely ignore this original movie and let it flop. Yeah, well, guess what? Megalopolis is an original movie, but it's a bad original movie. Now, this might seem like a crazy thing to consider, but sometimes original movies can be bad. Listen, I'm tired of the constant sequels and remakes just as much as y'all are, but I'm not going to give this movie brownie points just because it tells an original story, especially considering the fact that it tells its original story just as, if not more poorly, than a lot of sequels and remakes do. The fact that the Mean Girls remake and this movie are right next to each other on the ranking is proof that yes, original movies can be bad as well. Original movies can very easily be just as shitty as your average pointless sequel or remake. I am not giving this movie brownie points just because it tells an original story. It's gonna have to do a lot more than that, and I mean a lot more than that, if it wants to convince me that it's a good movie. I'm also not going to give this movie brownie points just because it was made by a famous director. This movie was directed by Francis Ford Coppola, who is best known for the Godfather movies and Apocalypse Now. This was apparently a passion project that he had in development for a very long time. This movie went through serious development hell. You watch the movie and it's like extremely obvious, yeah, this movie had to have gone through some form of development hell. Apparently, development on this movie started all the way back in the late 70s, before finally seeing the light of day in 2024. Apparently, given the strange, bizarre nature of this movie's storyline, this movie's structure, this movie's everything, there was not a single major film studio that wanted to pick this movie up for distribution. And then the movie was finally able to be released in some way. And it ended up being a massive flop. And I mean a massive flop. This movie had a budget of, I believe, $136 million, $120 million, I'm not sure. And it only made $14 million at the box office, and that was it. But to get back on topic, I am not giving this movie brownie points just because it was made by the same guy who made The Godfather over half a century ago. I also saw people defend this movie when it came out, claiming that like, no, you can't say this movie's bad, it's from the same guy who made Apocalypse Now, and it's like, so? The movie's still garbage? Just because Francis Ford Coppola made a really good movie back then, that doesn't mean this movie is good as well. If Martin Scorsese ever made a bad movie, I'm not gonna pretend that it's a good movie just because it was made by Martin Scorsese. If Quentin Tarantino ever made a bad movie, I'm not gonna pretend that it's a good movie just because it was made by Quentin Tarantino. Hypothetically speaking, let's say Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey were to be bad for whatever reason. There's a very high chance that it'll end up being a masterpiece, but let's just say, for whatever reason, the movie ends up being bad. And then what? What are you gonna do? Are you gonna pretend that the movie is good just because it has Christopher Nolan's name on it? Are you gonna pretend that it's a good movie just because, oh, but he made Oppenheimer, and Oppenheimer was a good movie, so that means The Odyssey is a good movie as well? No. That's not how it works. It doesn't work like that. If a director makes a bad movie, then they made a bad movie, period. The quality of a director's other movies do not dictate the quality of this one bad movie they put out. Francis Ford Coppola made 3 of the greatest movies of all time, with the first 2 Godfathers and Apocalypse Now, and he's also made Megalopolis, which is complete dog shit. Two things can be true at the same time. Oh yeah, let's not forget as well, even before this godforsaken movie came out, there was already a whole lot of shit going on with it. If I remember correctly, there was a trailer that was released for this movie that had like negative reviews for The Godfather and Apocalypse Now attached to it. I guess to show that like, yeah, these were controversial, hated movies back then, but now they're agreed to be masterpieces, so maybe the same thing will happen with Megalopolis. And then as it turns out, no, these quotes never existed. They were AI generated. They went to ChatGPT and they're like, yo, write down a few negative reviews for The Godfather, and ChatGPT was like, alright, say no more, I got you, fam. People immediately noticed that, and I think like only a day later they took down the trailer. Even long before this damn movie came out, people knew it would be a fucking dumpster fire. And then on a more serious note, video footage would resurface of Francis Ford Coppola, I believe, like groping, harassing the woman on set of the movie, kissing them without their consent, I believe. And remember, this guy is 80 something years old, so it's like, you know, they're both adults, but it's still really weird regardless. Combine that with the fact that I remember reading something that apparently Francis Ford Coppola defended a pedophile director, I think, and then it makes the brief cancel culture subplot in Megalopolis a lot more, why the hell would you put that in your movie? What the is wrong with you, you know? Now, to move on to slightly more lighthearted territory, I rewatched this movie thinking, okay, you know what, maybe this movie could be a little bit funny bad. Maybe the unhinged nature of this movie and its storyline, maybe that could be funny in retrospect. I rewatched the movie, no, it's not funny. Admittedly, for the most part, I was kind of intrigued, I guess, by the movie and what was going on in it. Yes, sometimes the movie was boring, of course it was, but overall I found myself paying attention to what was going on in the movie a lot more than I would have expected. Of course, no matter how hard you pay attention to the movie's plot, it's still impossible to understand what's going on in it. But still, this movie has a lot of potential to become the next so bad it's good classic movie. This could have been the next The Room, the next Birdemic, the next Troll 2. And unfortunately, it's not. There's only two funny bad moments in the entire movie, and that's it. One of them happens early on into the movie, the other one happens near the end of the movie. I'm sure most of you are very well aware of the infamous "so go back to the club." That scene right there, that is a f***ing hilarious scene. It's not even intended to be hilarious, and yet it is. This movie would have been so much better if the entire movie was like this one scene. Unfortunately, it's not. And the second funny bad moment is near the end of the movie. So there's like this old rich guy who's played by Jon Voight, and I don't know a single thing. Listen, I don't feel like describing this character, okay? It's a nightmare to describe it, okay? But basically there's these two characters that come to visit him because they think like he's sick and he's gonna die and whatever. And then they notice that he has like a massive boner, and then as it turns out, it's not a boner, it's a arrow, and he ends up shooting both of the people with the arrow. And it's such a weird, like, absurd thing. And reminder, this movie is not a comedy. This is not a movie that's like, oh, it's funny, haha, it makes me laugh. No. This is a movie that I'm supposed to take seriously. And then you have a scene like this in your movie, and it's like, am I watching a Adam Sandler movie, or am I watching a movie from the guy who made The Godfather? What the hell is going on? Oh yeah, speaking of Jon Voight, I guess there was like this whole thing with Francis Ford Coppola where like he would hire canceled actors in his movie. In addition to Jon Voight, who's apparently this like vocal Trump supporter, you also have Shia LaBeouf, I think that's how you pronounce his name, in this movie. And for whatever reason, he plays like a character that's like in drag. I don't know. For some reason, this character hates Caesar, and so he's the one that provides like the fake video of Caesar and the girl that I mentioned earlier. And then after that's resolved, his character is never seen again for the rest of the movie. But going back to the actor, I believe Shia LaBeouf has like allegations against him. I don't remember the specific allegations, but there are supposedly allegations against him. So Francis over here is just hiring like canceled actors in his movie just for the sake of, I don't know, to make a statement. I don't know. It's so damn stupid. This is yet another movie where I have to wonder, who was this movie made for? This is obviously a movie that won't have much mass appeal, as evident by the fact that it only made $14 million at the box office. I guess you'd have to be a really pretentious cinephile to enjoy this movie, but I don't know. I think this movie was made for one person, and only one person, and that person was Francis Ford Coppola. And you know, there's a small part of me that wants to be like, oh, I'm glad this movie finally got to see the light of day, since this was supposedly a passion project of his, and it was in development hell since the late 70s. But considering the 1-2 combo punch of Megalopolis being a movie and Francis Ford Coppola being a person, it's like, no, I don't know if that really matters all that much. This movie might have finally seen the light of day, but does that really matter if the movie is bad? Watching this movie and thinking about how it was in development hell, it just made me think, you know, maybe this movie was good at one point. Admittedly, you watch this movie and it's like, there are few moments in it, there are a few moments in the movie where, yeah, this kind of has the potential to be a good movie. There are very small bits and pieces of a good movie in here, but it's cluttered with all kinds of pretentious bullshit going on. Maybe somewhere out there exists an alternate universe where Megalopolis came out in like the 80s or something, and it's a masterpiece movie. It's considered one of the greatest movies ever made. Another Francis Ford Coppola masterpiece. But alas, we do not live in that timeline. No siree, we do not live in that timeline at all. With all of that said, let us move on to the next movie on the list. For number 6, I'm going to ask y'all a question. What happens when you take a cult classic animated movie from nearly 15 years ago and you bring it back, except it has almost nothing that made the original animated movie good? Well, I'll tell you what you get. You get Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate. That's right, 2 mega stinkers back to back, just like that. Now, some of you might be wondering, why am I putting this movie at number 6? Why is this not in the bottom 5? Well, I have 2 reasons. Number 1, I genuinely think that the bottom 5 movies are far worse than Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate, as bad as it may be. And number 2, I don't know, I feel like this movie is kind of low-hanging fruit. I mean, yeah, it's awful, don't get me wrong, this movie is trash, I'm not defending it, but it kind of feels unfair for me to put this below movies like Madam Web and Joker 2 and Mufasa, because like those are real movies. Those are actual proper movies. And then Megamind 2 over here is just generic, cheaply made, low budget, straight to streaming slop for babies. It's bad, obviously, but you know, it doesn't really feel fair to put this below Megalopolis, because Megalopolis is at least a real movie. That being said though, this movie is still really awful, so yeah, I don't care. Number 6 is the highest I could put this movie, so just bear with me. Now, I've made 2 videos on this movie. The first one covered the initial reveal trailer for the movie, and the second one covered the movie itself. I feel like I went into good enough detail on why this movie is bad in my proper review for it, and given the fact that everyone has already talked about why this movie is bad, I'm probably going to keep this segment brief. For those that somehow have no idea what any of this is all about, allow me to explain. So in 2010, DreamWorks put out a movie called Megamind, and at the time it got good reviews, but it wasn't considered anything particularly special. A major point of criticism at the time when the movie came out was that it felt too derivative of other animated movies, such as The Incredibles and Despicable Me, which had only come out a few months earlier. Both Megamind and Despicable Me focus on a supervillain who, by the end of the movie, becomes a hero. Gru, the protagonist of Despicable Me, has an army of minions, while Megamind has a sidekick named Minion. The similarities to Despicable Me, I want to imagine, hindered this movie's chances of being more successful, and so alas, the movie ended up being forgotten about for most of the 2010s. In the early 2020s though, more and more people started giving this movie a lot more attention. Those that grew up watching the movie in the early 2010s rewatched the movie and found that it was surprisingly better than they remembered it being. The movie was praised for its many subversions of the superhero movie genre, which, remember, this came out in 2010, so yeah, this was after Iron Man and The Dark Knight changed the genre and made it big, but this was before Avengers 2012, which I want to say was when superhero movies became what they are today. There were only 3 MCU movies when this came out, just keep that in mind. The surprisingly fresh take that the movie had on the superhero genre hit hard in the early 2020s, as we were, and probably still are, going through a period where people are bored and sick of superhero movies. People criticize superhero movies for feeling very derivative and formulaic, a phenomenon widely referred to as superhero fatigue. Just like that, Megamind went from being one of the most overlooked DreamWorks movies to now being considered one of the best DreamWorks movies, a movie that deserved better. In a better universe, this movie could have become one of the big DreamWorks franchises alongside Shrek, Madagascar, Kung Fu Panda, and How to Train Your Dragon, but unfortunately that never happened. Our wishes for a Megamind follow-up were seemingly granted in 2022 when it was announced that there would be a new Megamind TV show coming out. This was back in 2022. We would have to wait 2 years for an update on this. And then one day in 2024, they release a trailer for Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate. Finally, after all this time, we have a Megamind 2, and it's unfortunately not what people expected out of it. From the trailer alone, you could already pinpoint there's a lot of things that are wrong with this movie. You don't even have to watch the whole movie, you could just watch this trailer and it tells you a lot of why the movie didn't work. For starters, the animation is much worse quality than in the first Megamind. Something that I think is very important to note is that this movie was not made by DreamWorks themselves, it was made by their television subsidiary, which explains why the animation looks like this. It still looks bad, but at least there's kind of a reason why it looks bad. Secondly, none of the voice actors from the first movie reprised their roles for this movie. Will Ferrell didn't come back to voice Megamind, David Cross didn't come back to voice Minion, etc. Again, this is a significantly lower budget movie, so I want to imagine it would have been impossible to get the celebrity voice actors back, but I'm still just putting that out there. And the third reason why people hated this movie, and this is the most important reason right here, this is the one reason that I cannot defend and be like, oh, it's okay because the movie had a low budget. This movie seemingly retconned a lot of the important details that the first Megamind had. In this movie, the titular Doom Syndicate was an old team of supervillains that Megamind was a part of, which was something that was never alluded to once in the original movie. At the beginning of the first movie, Megamind was completely alone. He had Minion and no one else. Nobody liked him. In contrast, everyone loved Metro Man. And this is what motivates Megamind to become a supervillain and to start a lifelong rivalry with Metro Man. This movie just completely throws that out the window with this supervillain team. And these are like the most generic Saturday morning cartoon villains you could possibly think of. I think it was very obvious that whatever villain this movie had would pale in comparison to Titan, the villain of the first movie. But still, these are such generic, unremarkable Saturday morning cartoon villains. And yes, fine, I'll say it. Throughout the whole movie, Megamind tries to stop the Doom Syndicate when he could very easily just shoot them with the dehydration gun. God, I wish I had come up with that first. My review came out before his review after all. Now, to give the movie a tiny bit of credit, there are a few interesting ideas in this movie that I think could work for a Megamind sequel if this was a better movie. There are other villains in this movie. They're a lot more minor when compared to the Doom Syndicate, but they are there. And a common theme is that they hate the fact that Megamind has become a superhero for Metro City. And on paper, That would make for an interesting concept. That could be executed well. They feel betrayed by the fact that Megamind had turned over to the good side. That is an interesting idea that is unfortunately wasted in an otherwise bad animated movie. Watching this movie, it was just unbelievably exhausting for me. Everything that made the first Megamind so good is seemingly gone in this movie. The first Megamind was a movie that anyone of any age could enjoy. This is a movie that like only young kids can really enjoy it, and I don't think they would enjoy the movie all that much. They took my goat over here and they turned him into f***ing Paw Patrol. They turned him into that ladybug cartoon. Like, what the hell, man? You can't do that. You can't do that. And yet, at the same time, despite everything, I don't really have the energy to hate this movie that much. Because again, this movie just feels like low-hanging fruit to me. Is this movie bad? Of course, it is. Don't get me wrong, but again, it doesn't feel right for me to like criticize this more than like Joker 2, because Joker 2 is a real movie. This is just low budget straight to streaming slop. It feels a lot more unfair to hate on this when compared to like Madam Web, because Madam Web was a proper theatrical movie. No duh, this movie is worse than like Kung Fu Panda 4, because Kung Fu Panda 4 was like a proper movie. It kind of feels off for me to like really hate this movie and go into detail about why it's bad, because it just feels like low-hanging fruit. But at the same time, I cannot deny this movie is really f***ing terrible. A complete insult to the original Megamind. Oh yeah, I brought up earlier how this whole thing was supposed to be a TV show, and then this ended up being a sequel. Yeah, well, as it turns out, on the same day this came out, there was a TV show, Megamind Rules. And I don't know what it is, but I kind of don't hate Megamind Rules as much as Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate. It's obviously not a good show, but you know, it's a lot of the problems that Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate had become a lot more forgivable for Megamind Rules, considering the fact that it's a TV show. The lower quality animation, the different voice actors, you know, it becomes a lot more understandable. If this was a Nickelodeon cartoon from like 2012, I don't think anyone would really care about it all that much. Even with all of that in mind, no pun intended, Megamind Rules unfortunately does not rule. In fact, it's also quite disappointing. It's not as awful as Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate, but it's also not the comeback that Megamind deserves. Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate is yet another movie on this list that makes me question who was this movie made for. The people that watched the original Megamind as kids in the early 2010s that are now grown up, they're not going to enjoy this movie at all because it feels a lot more babyish in comparison. And then kids are not going to enjoy this movie either because they don't know who the hell Megamind is. I don't think they're going to care about this niche DreamWorks movie from the early 2010s. This movie is trying to cater to an audience that doesn't care about Megamind, all while completely ignoring the audience that actually does care about Megamind. What a shame, really. What a shame. And with that said, it is time to finally move on to the bottom 5. Get ready, folks. This is when things start to get really, really ugly. As we begin our descent into the bottom 5 movies of the year, we get an unfortunate reminder that Megamind wasn't the only childhood icon to be desecrated in 2024. Number 5 is Saving Bikini Bottom, the Sandy Cheeks movie. Now, much like with Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate, this is another movie that I feel bad for putting this low on the list. Most of what I said about Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate could very easily apply to this movie as well. Is this movie worse than Joker 2 and Megalopolis? Yes. Yes, it is, but it feels too obvious that it's worse than those movies. Like, it's just, no duh, this is worse than Joker 2. It's such low-hanging fruit, it's such an easy target that I can't help but feel a little bit bad for putting this below real movies, when, much like Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate, this is generic low-budget straight-to-streaming slop made for babies. At the same time, though, what the is this movie? This is not SpongeBob. I don't know what this is, but it's not SpongeBob. In order for you to truly understand why this movie is bad, let me explain to y'all why SpongeBob is so beloved. At least like the older SpongeBob episodes, the first 3 seasons. Saving Bikini Bottom when compared to most SpongeBob media, yes, even outside of the pre-movie seasons, feels a lot more dumbed down for kids. You watch this movie and it's very obvious watching it that this is made for an extremely young demographic. And okay, one could argue that this isn't necessarily a bad thing, except for the fact that SpongeBob in its early days had this universal appeal to it. Anyone of any age could watch the older SpongeBob episodes and they would find them funny because they're just that well written. They're that funny. This is the exact same problem that I had with Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate. The first Megamind could appeal to anyone of any age. Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate is only for really young kids. And as I mentioned before, the target audience for Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate is really confusing. It feels too dumbed down for kids to be enjoyed by the teens and adults that grew up with the original Megamind all the way back in 2010. But today's kids don't know what the hell Megamind is, so they're not going to enjoy this movie that is supposed to be a sequel to a very niche animated movie from almost 15 years ago. Saving Bikini Bottom suffers a similar problem. Most of the people that love SpongeBob nowadays are teens and adults that grew up with the show during its golden age in the early 2000s. This is a movie that completely lacks that appeal. It is a movie made for very, very young children. But here's the problem. Nickelodeon, I don't know if you know this, but kids don't watch SpongeBob nowadays. Kids don't care about SpongeBob. Skibbity Toilet is their SpongeBob. SpongeBob is supposed to be something that anyone of any age can enjoy. And yet this movie just feels like a bastardized Cocomelon version of SpongeBob. What the hell is this? This is not SpongeBob. You watch this movie and it just has this very shell of its former self feel to it. Like, yeah, it has all of the SpongeBob characters that we know and love, and yet it just doesn't feel the same. The movie focuses on Sandy and SpongeBob traveling to the real world in order to save all of Bikini Bottom. I don't think I brought this up in my original review for this movie, but by this point, the idea of SpongeBob entering the real world no longer feels fresh or special. It was great in the first movie because it was a brand new concept at the time. The idea of seeing SpongeBob and Patrick in the real world. It was good in the second movie as well, not to the same extent, but it was still good. I'm well aware of the criticisms surrounding Sponge Out of Water. The fact that the trailers heavily marketed the real world scenes when in reality they only happened for like the last 15 to 20 minutes of the movie. Most of the movie is 2D animated and it takes place underwater. I think Sponge on the Run had a real world segment, but I think it was like a dream sequence. It didn't actually happen. It had like, I think Snoop Dogg was in it, and it had like Keanu Reeves as a tumbleweed. I don't know. I don't care. I'm counting it. I don't care. And now here we have our 4th consecutive SpongeBob movie that features these characters going into the real world. And by this point, it doesn't feel fresh, it doesn't feel special, it doesn't feel surprising anymore. This movie also contains another tired plot formula that these SpongeBob movies have, as most of the movie consists of SpongeBob and Sandy traveling to this water park laboratory place that has Bikini Bottom in it. I go into more detail about it in the review, okay? As we all know, the first SpongeBob movie was primarily a road trip movie that focused on SpongeBob and Patrick traveling to Shell City in order to get King Neptune's crown. The third movie had SpongeBob and Patrick going to Atlantic City, I think. I don't know, it was like a stupid pun like that, in order to save Gary. And now here we are with this movie, with another road trip plot. Somehow the second movie, they were able to come up with a different plot for it, a unique plot. And then for the next two movies, they're like, nah, let's just reuse the road trip plot that the first movie had. I mean, okay, I gotta be a little bit more fair to this movie. The previous three SpongeBob movies before this were all proper theatrical quality movies. This, again, is like a cheap, low-budget streaming movie for Netflix. But my point still stands. The main villain of this movie apparently worked with Sandy back when she lived in Texas before moving to Bikini Bottom. And so she wants to take all of the residents of Bikini Bottom and turn them into toys, I guess. It's supposed to be like a commentary on consumerism. I don't know. It feels highly out of place for a movie like this, and it also feels highly ironic given the way Nickelodeon has treated SpongeBob for quite a long time now. Oh yeah, Sandy's family is also introduced in this movie, and they're like, whatever. They're characters that exist. I don't care. The main problem with this movie is that it just doesn't feel like SpongeBob. I know it's cliche to say that SpongeBob nowadays isn't as good as it used to be, but like watching this movie, you really get that feel that like, yeah, this isn't the same SpongeBob that I grew up with. What the is this? I honest to God think this is the lowest point in the entire SpongeBob series. I could very easily imagine, you know, I'm sure if there's any parents watching this video, I'm sure you've had a situation where it's like your son or your daughter wants to watch something with you. And so, against your will, to make your kid happy, you decide to watch the thing with them. Most of the time, I want to imagine you're just pretending to enjoy what your kid wants you to watch just to make them happy. But maybe there's moments where it's like you can genuinely enjoy watching something with your kid. If your kid wants to watch Barney with you, for example, I want to imagine it's going to be like you just pretend to enjoy Barney. But then something like Golden Age SpongeBob, that could be something that like, yeah, you can enjoy it as well. You and your kid could enjoy Golden Age SpongeBob. You and your kid could enjoy the first SpongeBob movie. You and your kid could enjoy seasons 4 and 5 of SpongeBob, because those seasons, they have a lot of great episodes in them as well. The best episodes from these two seasons, Krusty Towers, Roller Cowards, Crabs a la Mode, Dunces and Dragons, Friend or Foe, you know, people could enjoy those episodes regardless of age. They're still funny episodes that have a lot of things to enjoy about them. This movie in comparison is like your kid forces you to watch it with them, and it's like maybe they could get a tiny bit of enjoyment out of it because they're a stupid 3-year-old who doesn't know any better. But it's going to be a painful movie to sit through. It's going to be hard to pretend that you're enjoying the movie that you're watching. That's not what SpongeBob should be like. SpongeBob should be enjoyed by anyone of any age. SpongeBob is supposed to be funny. This movie is not funny. If you're over the age of 5, this movie is not funny to you at all. Everything just feels so generic and babyish, a far cry from what SpongeBob used to be. Again, I feel bad for criticizing this movie given the fact that it's such an easy target movie, but this is a genuinely hard movie to sit through, and I feel that number 5 is the most appropriate place for me to put this movie. All I'm gonna say is, at the very least, they managed to slightly redeem themselves with the Plankton movie that came out recently. A movie that is, mind you, still not very good, still a massive far cry from what SpongeBob used to be, and it still has this dumbed down for babies feel. It doesn't have that universal appeal that old SpongeBob had, and yet it is a considerably better, considerably more tolerable movie than the Sandy Cheeks movie. You're almost able to forgive the generic baby movie feel of the Plankton movie. And for what it's worth, there are a couple redeeming qualities about the Plankton movie. Not enough to make it good, but enough to make it better than the Sandy Cheeks movie. What an insult to the SpongeBob series. I have no shame in saying that this is the lowest point in the SpongeBob franchise. I genuinely think that this is a lower point for SpongeBob than A Pal for Gary or One Course Meal. I don't care what anyone says. And with that, let us move on to number 4. Number 4 is... okay, I have a lot of stuff to say about number 4, so let's just dive right into it. Number 4 is Emilia Perez. Okay, let me give you a chronological timeline. So this movie came out sometime around the latter half of 2024 onto Netflix. I knew literally nothing about this movie, except I saw that reviews for it were not that good. But I didn't think much of it. I just thought, another crappy Netflix original movie. The sky is blue, grass is green, what else is new? And then, in January, the nominations for the 97th Academy Awards were announced, where this movie received a whopping 13, yes, 13 Oscar nominations, including for Best Picture. And it was around that time where I saw more and more people ridiculing this movie. The hate for this movie began to grow a lot more. By this time, I had already finalized my list. I had already found all of the movies that I wanted to talk about on this list, and I'd already placed them where I wanted to place them. But given how highly controversial and hated this movie became all of a sudden, I knew I couldn't make a video on the worst movies of 2024 without acknowledging this movie in some way, shape, or form. And so originally I had this movie as a dishonorable mention. And then, on the exact day that the Oscars were held, morbid curiosity got the best of me, and so I decided, you know what, let me go and watch this movie and see what the big deal is. I have this rule when it comes to making these lists where if I've never seen the movie, regardless of its reception, I cannot add it onto the best list or onto the worst list or anything like that. But I wanted to make an exception for this movie and include it as a dishonorable mention, just because even though supposedly this movie was really bad, it managed to get 13 Oscar nominations. Just so you know, Lord of the Rings: Return of the King is another movie that received 13 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, which it won. And Return of the King is considered one of the greatest movies ever made. This movie is considered hot garbage. Here I was only a few hours before the Oscars started, and I watched the movie. And I've gotta say, holy shit, y'all were not lying. This movie is bad. I went into this movie expecting it to be a comedy of some kind. This movie is a musical. A really bad musical, unsurprisingly. But there was one song in particular in this movie that received a ton of ridicule online. And I'm sure you know exactly which song I'm talking about. I'm sure you're all well aware of that one lyric in this one song that was the subject of constant ridicule all around the internet. Now, I was familiar with this one song in the movie, and this song has like a very like campy comedic feel to it. And it made me think the whole movie would have this like campy feel to it. Imagine my shock when I find out no, that's not the case. Most of the movie takes itself very seriously. Most of the movie is played out in a serious tone. And then out of nowhere, you have this one musical number in it that like feels very campy and comedic. And much like with Megalopolis, I have to ask myself, am I watching a fucking Adam Sandler comedy, or am I watching a movie that was nominated for 13 Oscars, including Best Picture? I thought there was a small chance that this movie could be funny bad. It's not. It's not funny bad at all. This one musical number is the only remotely funny bad moment in the entire movie. The rest of the movie, as I mentioned before, plays out to be very serious. It tries to be serious. Despite the constant ridicule surrounding this movie, despite the many controversies surrounding it, nothing, I repeat, nothing could have prepared me for how boring this movie is. This movie focuses on a cartel leader who wants to retire from the cartel and transition into a woman, starting a new life subsequently. And so she gets this like journalist newswoman to help her out transitioning. I don't know. The cartel leader who transitions into a woman is the titular Emilia Perez, and she also has a family. And for some reason, I don't know, maybe they explained this in the movie, but I wasn't paying attention to it because this movie is boring as hell. Emilia doesn't want her family to know about her transitioning. Before she transitions into a woman, she says goodbye to her family, who are sent to like Switzerland, Sweden, I don't know. And then she undergoes the surgery to become a woman, while also simultaneously faking her death. And so, as Emilia Perez, she tries to present herself as like an aunt, I believe. It's a really fucking stupid story. I genuinely cannot remember if the movie explains why Emilia Perez doesn't want her family to know that she transitioned and that she faked her death. Oh yeah, it's around this time where I want to acknowledge the controversy surrounding the actress that plays Emilia Perez. So I believe shortly after it was announced that this movie received 13 Oscar nominations, a bunch of old tweets from the actress that plays Emilia Perez would resurface, where she was exposed for saying like really racist stuff about Muslims and George Floyd and a bunch of other stuff, I believe. And all that did was add even more fuel to the fire. All that did was make the movie into even more of a laughingstock than it already was. The tone of this movie is all over the damn place. As I mentioned before, you have that one song, the infamous song, that feels very campy and out of place given the rest of the movie is more serious in comparison. But actually, almost all of the songs feel this way. The movie tries to be taken seriously, it tries to be dramatic and whatever, and then out of nowhere it'll hit you with a musical number that sounds like I'm watching a Disney movie or something like that. None of the other songs in this movie have that comedic campy tone that that one song has, but they also don't fit in with the tone that this movie is trying to have. I have to remind myself, this movie is not a comedy. It's not even like a comedy drama. That's kind of what I expected it to be. This movie is purely a drama, and it's a really bad drama. And unfortunately, it's not an unintentionally funny drama or anything like that. Again, there is nothing funny bad about this movie. Nothing funny bad at all. I've seen a lot of people say that this movie poorly portrays Mexican culture and trans culture, and I would love to go into more detail on how this movie represents those cultures, but unfortunately, I'm not Mexican, nor am I trans. I'm sure there are Mexican people and trans people that have reviewed this movie, and they could go into better detail on how this movie represents those two cultures. I'm just gonna acknowledge that, yeah, this movie portrays both cultures poorly, and that's it. I would love to elaborate on how it portrays both cultures poorly, but unfortunately, I'm not familiar with either culture myself, ironically enough, so I don't want to, start a controversy. I don't want to criticize the movie for misrepresenting both cultures and then misrepresent both cultures myself, This movie heavily focuses on Mexican culture, which is really ironic because this is a French movie. This movie was made by a French director. There are 0 Mexican actors in this movie, which sparked a huge backlash among the Mexican community. And according to the director of this movie, the reason as to why there are no Mexican actors in this movie is because he couldn't find Mexican actors that were talented enough for this movie, which only added even more backlash. If I recall correctly, this movie wasn't even being filmed in Mexico. I don't know about that, but I wouldn't be surprised at all. It's a movie that heavily focuses on Mexican culture. It poorly represents Mexican culture. It's made by a French man, and it doesn't have any Mexican actors in it. I wouldn't be surprised if the movie wasn't even filmed in Mexico, honestly. I don't know how the hell this movie was nominated for 13 Oscars. I mean, the good news is, it only won 2 Oscars out of 13. It would have been better if it won 0 Oscars, but, you know what? At least there were more Oscars that it lost compared to Oscars that it won. So, try and make the most out of this kind of situation. The two Oscars that it won for were Best Supporting Actress for Zoe Saldana, I think is how you pronounce her name. I apologize if I mispronounce her name. And I mean, yeah, I guess she's okay. I guess her performance in this movie is okay. I don't know about, the competition. I don't know who else was nominated for Best Supporting Actress, but I guess, this movie is garbage, but I guess she was okay. I don't know. And then this movie won Best Original Song, which is absolutely fucking ridiculous because every song in this movie is hot garbage. The song that won wasn't that song, but it was instead another song that is just as terrible. And besides that, there were no other Oscar wins for this movie. Thank God for that. But I'm still amazed at how a movie this bad, a movie this boring, could be nominated for an Oscar, let alone 13 Oscars. How the hell was this movie nominated for Best Picture? I mean, obviously it didn't win Best Picture, thankfully, but just the idea that the people that run the Oscars looked at this movie and they thought, yeah, this had a chance of winning Best Picture. This was considered worthy to win Best Picture potentially, is crazy to me, especially when you look at the movies that came out in 2024 that weren't nominated for Best Picture. And as a matter of fact, some of these movies didn't receive any acknowledgement at all at the Oscars. How the hell did this movie get 13 Oscar nominations, but then a movie like Challengers, which is a amazing movie, that got 0 Oscar nominations? That is crazy to me. How the hell was this movie nominated for Best Picture over Challengers, over I Saw the TV Glow, over Furiosa, over The Wild Robot? Listen, I'm not one of those animationist cinema people, okay? I'm not saying this from an animationist cinema perspective. I've moved on from that bullcrap a long time ago, but I'm saying this from the perspective of this is a movie that everyone says is really good. Everyone can agree that, yeah, The Wild Robot is a damn good movie. One of the best movies of 2024. Everyone agrees with that, right? Right. And so you have this movie that everyone agrees is one of the best movies of 2024, and you would think it would be nominated for Best Picture because of that, right? Wrong. Instead, this far more controversial, polarizing movie gets nominated for Best Picture instead. Actually, I don't even know if polarizing is the right word to describe this movie. Polarizing implies that there are tons of people that hate this movie, but there are also just as many people that love this movie, which is not the case at all. I have never seen anyone defend this movie. I have never seen anyone say this movie is good. At best, I've seen people say this movie isn't as bad as everyone makes it out to be, but it's still not a good movie. It's mid, it's okay, whatever. The bottom line is, I've never seen anyone say this movie is good. So how the hell this movie got nominated for Best Picture is a mystery to me. Could you imagine if this movie won Best Picture instead of Anora? I've never seen Anora. I'm sure it's a good movie. Actually, of the 10 movies that were nominated for Best Picture, excluding Emilia Perez, I've only seen 3 of them. Dune 2, A Complete Unknown, and Wicked. I thought Dune 2 was the best movie of the year, and so that was my pick for Best Picture. I also thought A Complete Unknown was a fantastic movie though, so I wouldn't have minded if it won instead. I don't think Wicked is Best Picture material at all, but at least it wouldn't have been Emilia Perez. At least Emilia Perez wouldn't have won. So, I guess I'd be fine with it. At the end of the day, Anora won Best Picture and not Emilia Perez. And so, more likely than not, Emilia Perez will just fade away into obscurity. I don't see this becoming an infamous bad movie like The Room or Birdemic, especially considering the fact that, again, this movie is not funny bad like those 2 movies. With all of the controversy surrounding this movie, I was expecting it to be offensively bad or hilariously bad, and what I end up getting instead is one of the most boring movies I've ever seen in my entire life. Now that the Oscars have ended, there's a very high chance that this movie will be rightfully forgotten about, never to be seen or heard from ever again. And that's my cue to move on to number 3. Number 3 was the first movie that I watched in 2024, and in retrospect, I should have looked at that as the first red flag that 2024 wasn't going to be all that good of a year when it came to movies. Number 3 is Argyle. Now, I have a funny story. I originally had this movie up way high on the list. This was originally going to be around like number 11 or so. I made a video on this movie where I proclaimed it to be the worst movie of 2024 already. And then I subsequently watched Madam Web and Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate, which I would also make videos on, and I would declare those movies to be worse than Argyle. And then, when the time came for me to work on this list, I rewatched this movie. This was another movie on this list that I decided to rewatch. I thought this movie was bad the first time I watched it. I remember walking out of the theater thinking, what the f*** did I just watch? What the hell was this? But I saw how much more poor quality these two movies were, and I guess it made me think that this movie wasn't that bad in comparison. And then I rewatched this movie for this list, and holy shit, this movie is genuinely so much worse than I remember it being. I mean this from the bottom of my heart when I say that this is probably the most pretentious movie I've ever seen, and one of the most headache-inducing movies I've ever seen. Some of you might be wondering, why am I ranking this lower than the similarly pretentious and hard-to-understand Megalopolis? Well, you see, the difference between these two movies is that Megalopolis at least has kind of an excuse to be pretentious. Megalopolis is an artsy-fartsy movie that may or may not be We Live in a Society from a famous director that peaked all the way back in the 70s. Argyle is a action comedy. This is a movie that you're supposed to find funny. You're supposed to have fun watching this movie. And that makes the pretentious, confusing nature of this movie's storyline even worse than it already is. This is a movie that's just filled to the brim with different plot twists. This is like a heavy, like, spy-related movie. And so I guess, yeah, obviously there would be plot twists all over. But the problem is, there are way too many plot twists in this movie. And I mean way too many, to the point where you have to wonder, like, what the hell is this? It feels like I'm watching an entire trilogy's worth of movie ideas crammed into one singular movie. Director Matthew Vaughn states that he intends on making this movie into a trilogy. Yeah, well, good luck with that. I think you've used up every idea for this trilogy in this first movie. And given how this movie performed critically and commercially, that sequel is never gonna happen. Good luck with that, Matthew. Good luck. Imagine if, like, you know, the Star Wars original trilogy. Imagine if Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi never existed, and instead everything that happened in those movies happened in A New Hope, and that includes the events of A New Hope itself. All of a sudden, Star Wars becomes this insanely bloated movie that is impossible to follow, impossible to understand. Just like that, Star Wars is not the big cultural phenomenon that it is today. That's what it's like with this movie. There are way too many concepts in this movie's storyline for it to work as a singular movie. This feels like something that, like, they have a first movie and they could very easily cut it into a second movie. They have, like, a lot of stuff that they could just put into the sequel, and then for some reason Matthew Vaughn's like, nah, let's just put it all into this one movie, it. And what we end up getting is one of the most headache-inducing movies I've ever seen in my entire life. I went into this movie expecting a simple dumb fun action comedy. There are dumb fun moments in the movie, but they're not enough to save it, and you cannot enjoy these moments because you know that they're only temporary. I went into this movie expecting something similar to 2022's Bullet Train, which I think is one of the most underrated movies of the 2020s so far. Bullet Train is a fun action comedy. It's loads of fun. It has a lot of characters in it, but it doesn't feel bloated or confusing or anything like that. And so I went into this movie expecting it to be something kind of similar to Bullet Train. And what I end up getting is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. And I can't even imagine what it would be like to watch this movie based on the trailers. The trailers do not tell you at all how bloated this movie is. Imagine watching the trailer for this movie and you think, oh, this looks like a funny movie. We don't really get a lot of funny movies in this day and age, Everything nowadays is MCU this and A24 that, finally we get a comedy in this day and age. And so you go and see this movie expecting it to be a throwback to a better time when we had movies like Hot Fuzz and Tropic Thunder coming out. And so you expect this to be like a modern day counterpart to those movies. You expect this to be the modern day equivalent to these movies. And what you end up getting instead is a movie that's pretentious as hell, confusing as hell, bloated as hell. It's not a very funny movie, so even if the first 3 issues weren't there, the movie still wouldn't be all that good. And the few dumb fun moments that are in this movie, again, you can't have much fun watching them because you know that they're temporary moments. You know that eventually these few fun action scenes that are in the movie, they're temporary, and then the movie will go back to being confusing as hell with its storyline. Alright, I think I've delayed the inevitable long enough. Allow me to try and explain the plot of this movie without having this segment last 5 hours long. The movie begins with Ellie Conway, played by Bryce Dallas Howard, an author best known for the popular Argyle book series. As she plans a trip to visit her family to help her write the final book in the series, she meets Aiden, played by Sam Rockwell, who tries to help Ellie escape from the train that they're currently on as it's been infiltrated. As it turns out, the secret organization that Ellie writes about in her Argyle series actually exists, with the leader of the organization being played by Bryan Cranston, who I'm just gonna say is unironically the best thing about this movie. The cast in general do try to save this movie a bit, but unfortunately they're not enough, but Bryan Cranston especially is great as the villain of this movie. I'm not even just saying that because haha Walter White jokes or anything like that. No, genuinely, he is the best part of the movie. The cast in general is really good. I mean, this movie has a packed cast, seriously, which I want to imagine contributed to the massive budget that this movie has, but I'll get into that later on. Bryce Dallas Howard, Sam Rockwell, Samuel L. Jackson, Bryan Cranston, Henry Cavill, John Cena, Dua Lipa. Well, actually, I don't know about that one. Dua Lipa's barely in the movie. Her character appears at the very beginning within the Argyle book universe, and she dies almost immediately. It's a cameo, essentially. You know what, though? This just made me realize something. FKA Twigs in The Crow, Lady Gaga in Joker 2, Selena Gomez in Emilia Perez, and now Dua Lipa in Argyle. If I had a nickel for every time there was a bad 2024 movie that had a female musician star in it, I would have 4 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's really weird that it happened 4 times, don't you think? Honestly, it's kind of a miracle that Ariana Grande somehow managed to avoid joining this club. But I'm getting off topic. Ellie and Aiden travel to London to find something. I don't remember at all. And I guess they end up finding it. And then this is when we get our first plot twist of sorts for this movie. At a hotel, Ellie overhears Aiden talking on the phone, talking about how Ellie has been annoying him throughout this whole mission to the point where he wants to strangle her and stuff like that, which ends up scaring Ellie. She promptly runs away to her family. As it turns out though, this was all a misunderstanding. Aiden was talking to Alfie, Samuel L. Jackson's character, and also the leader of the good team, I guess. I don't know. Samuel L. Jackson's character is the leader of the good team, while Bryan Cranston's character is the leader of the bad team. Got it? Got it. Oh yeah, by the way, as I mentioned, the name of Samuel L. Jackson's character in this movie is Alfie. Ellie has a cat, a really bad CGI looking cat named Alfie. Isn't that inconvenient? Don't worry, it gets better. It gets so much better. And so Ellie meets up with her parents in this other hotel, and this is where we get another plot twist. And if the plot twists ended here, then everything would be fine. But nope, they just keep getting worse and worse and worse. As it turns out, Ellie's dad is Bryan Cranston's character, the main villain of the movie. That alone is a good plot twist, and if the movie stopped with that, then it would be fine, but nope, it keeps going. It keeps on going. Aiden appears trying to rescue Ellie from her parents, subsequently shooting Ellie's mom in the process. And the two of them manage to escape to a vineyard in France, where they meet Alfie. And it's there where we get the big plot twist surrounding this movie. Everything that Ellie writes about in her book series happened to her in real life. Her name is not Ellie Conway, it's Rachel Kyle, aka R. Kyle. Very clever movie, very clever. As it turns out, Ellie, Rachel, whatever, was a spy, much like Argyle himself. And then, this movie does something that I have never seen any other movie do. It retcons a plot twist with another plot twist. As it turns out, Ellie, Rachel, whatever's parents are not actually her parents. Bryan Cranston's character, the main villain of the movie, is not her dad, despite what was established earlier. This movie set up a huge plot twist earlier on, and now it's just completely undoing it, completely retconning it for seemingly no reason, other than to make the movie's storyline even more bloated and confusing than it already is. I'm guessing like an accident happened to Rachel that caused her to end up in the hospital, where you have the two fake parents come in. You have Bryan Cranston's character, and then you have the fake mother. I don't remember her name. I don't remember the actress's name. I don't care either, honestly. This movie sucks. And then they essentially lie to her. They claim that they are her parents, and they give her all of these different like lies and stuff, convincing her that she was never a spy. She had a completely different life, and the thing that caused her to end up in the hospital was a figure skating accident. After finding out about this, Rachel and Aiden set out to get revenge on Rachel's fake parents. And that's where the first movie ends. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I'm looking forward to that sequel. Oh wait, I forgot. We're still going on. This would have been a good point to end the movie, and then just have the rest of the movie be a sequel. That would make this plot easier to understand. It would give you more time to digest, to process everything that goes on in this movie. But no, this is all just one movie. This movie started off as being about a book, by the way. Just friendly reminder, keep that in mind. So the two of them head to this like palace in the middle of nowhere. I don't f***ing remember why, and I don't care either. And then as it turns out, in another plot twist, Rachel's fake mom is alive. She was wearing a bulletproof vest when Aiden shot her. Isn't that f***ing convenient? The two of them end up on this ship, where they try to transfer, like, these files, I don't know, to Alfie. I don't remember at all. Okay, this movie is confusing as hell. There's a scene where Rachel shoots Aiden and seemingly joins the villain's side briefly, trying to give the files to her fake parents. And then it's just like out of nowhere, it's like, nope, actually she was pretending, which, you know, I kind of get that. I kind of see what the movie was trying to do, you know? She pretends to be on the villain's side briefly, but it's so badly executed when you combine that with the millions and millions of plot twists that are in this movie. As I mentioned before, Rachel shoots Aiden, but Aiden manages to survive because, get this is the most stupid thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Get this. So there's a character in the Argyle book series that seemingly dies after getting shot. At one point, Ellie gets an email from a fan suggesting a concept where, as it turns out, plot twist, this character survives. Thanks to this very specific thing where it's like, if you shoot a bullet into the heart, it's like there's a very small hole where the bullet can go through and it doesn't shoot at the heart. It doesn't hurt the heart or anything like that, and you don't die, so you could still survive. I don't know, it's really stupid. It's also worth noting that when Rachel was a spy, in addition to working with Aiden and Alfie, she also worked with this other woman who unfortunately died, with this woman acting as an unintentional inspiration for the girl that gets shot in the Argyle book universe. Keep that in mind, that's gonna be important information. So Rachel and Aiden try to transfer these files to Alfie. They end up stopping Bryan Cranston's character. He dies. Like, he dies for real. There's no bullcrap plot twist where it's like, oh no, as it turns out, he managed to survive his death. He managed to fake his death, and so he moved to Albuquerque to start a new life, becoming a high school chemistry teacher. There's nothing like that at all. His character is dead. Just like that, permanently. The two of them end up going outside in order to try and transfer these files to Alfie. And at this point, you're over here like, oh my god, finally this movie's about to end. Please be over, please. And then Rachel's fake mother appears out of nowhere, and she says like a bunch of random words, and she's holding up a music box that's playing, and this causes Rachel to become evil, and she starts fighting Aiden for some reason. I guess it's like brainwashing, I don't know. It's padding out is what it is. It's like, let's make this movie longer than it needs to be. This is a long movie. This movie is like 2 hours and 18 minutes when it has no reason to be this long. It is a 2 hour and 18 minute long movie, and it gives you way too much to care about and not enough time to take in everything that goes on in it. Just as Rachel is about to end Aiden once and for all, someone knocks out Rachel's fake mom cold with a wrench, subsequently destroying the music box and snapping Rachel out. And as one final you to the audience of this movie, as it turns out, yet another plot twist, the person that stopped Rachel's fake mom was the woman that supposedly died. As it turns out, she was still alive. And as another plot twist, we get 2 plot twists in a row, because this movie doesn't have enough plot twists, clearly. She was the one that sent Rachel, Ellie, whatever, the email about the hole in the heart thing or whatever, how you could still survive getting shot in the heart. That email was sent from her. Absolutely wonderful writing. God damn. It's all so perfectly convenient, isn't it? Rachel finishes up the final book in the Argyle series, and everyone lives happily ever after. The end. Oh yeah, did you guys forget this movie started off as being about a book? Because I sure as hell did. So you think that's it? That's the end of the movie. Well, as it turns out, no. That's not the end of the movie. Now, I have to bring up that some of you may know Matthew Vaughn for providing the Kingsman film series. Now, I've got to admit, I have never seen the Kingsman movies. I don't know if they're good or bad. I've heard the first Kingsman is a really good movie, but then the sequels are hit or miss in comparison. They're not as good. They cannot be any worse than Argyle. That's for sure. We cut to a post-credits scene that takes place at the Kingsman bar. I don't know. The scene supposedly takes place 20 years earlier. 20 years before what? I don't know. It can't be 20 years before the events of the movie we had just watched, because it won't make much sense, and you're gonna see why in a little bit. But anyways, it's here at the Kingsman bar where we see a significantly younger Argyle. And just like that, this movie has the gall to give us a sequel tease. Argyle Book 1, which is supposed to be an in-universe movie adaptation of one of the Argyle books. Okay, first of all, you don't make a sequel and name it Book 1, because that's going to confuse audiences. People are going to look at Argyle, and then they're going to look at Argyle Book 1, and they're going to ask, which one's the first movie? Which one do I watch first? Furthermore, I have to ask, why didn't they just do this from the beginning? Why didn't they just make an in-universe movie adaptation of one of the books? Instead of this weird meta bullshit where it's like everything that happens in this fictional book happened to this fictional author in real life, in the fictional real life that this movie takes place in. Also, great idea connecting this to the Kingsman movie franchise, because, clearly this movie isn't f***ing bloated enough already. You think that's it? Well, get a load of this. Matthew Vaughn intends on making this a trilogy of movies. Not only that, but he also intends on making a connected universe, a cinematic universe, if you will, with the Kingsman franchise, the Argyle franchise, and a third currently unknown franchise. All I'm gonna say, Matthew Vaughn, is good f***ing luck getting any of this stuff to happen. This movie, unsurprisingly, did very poorly critically and commercially. This movie received very bad reviews from critics, and it ended up being a box office flop. This movie had a staggeringly high budget of $200 million, and it couldn't even make $100 million. Wow. Even if this movie was good, there was no chance for it to be a successful movie at the box office. It's a comedy, and it's an original story. And in 2024, both of those things are a big no-no when it comes to box office success. But it's the extra added fact that this movie is god-awful that just makes it even less surprising that, yeah, this movie flopped. And it just makes me question, where the hell did this budget go? Most likely it's because of the massive star-studded cast that the movie has. As I mentioned before, Rachel has a cat named Alfie, and for some reason in every scene, I repeat, every single scene that this cat is in, it's very obviously CGI, which I have no idea why they decided to do that. When it's like an intense action scene, it's like, yeah, okay, it makes sense to use a CGI cat, obviously. You wouldn't want to use a real cat, God no. But then you have a scene like this where you have Alfie jump up next to a table next to Aiden, and it's like, really? You couldn't get a real cat for this scene? Why not? The CGI for the cat is also not very good either. You could very obviously tell that it's CGI, but that's beside the point. Just looking at the very bloated, cluttered nature of this movie's storyline, and it's like, yeah, it's not surprising at all that this movie had a $200 million budget, and it's even less surprising that this movie flopped. I don't know how much sense this is gonna make, but this movie has development hell written all over it. You could have told me this movie was in development since, I don't know, 2009, and I would believe you. What do you mean development only started in 2021? What do you mean this movie did not go through any sort of development hell? The extremely confusing and bloated nature of this movie, the cluttered all over the place scattered ideas that are in this movie's storyline say otherwise. I mean, yeah, most likely this movie's development was affected by both the pandemic and the 2023 strikes, but that's not the same thing as development hell. Again, I have to make parallels between this movie and Megalopolis, which actually did go through development hell, and it very much shows. I could very easily imagine Matthew Vaughn writing down the screenplay for this movie, hoping that people would find the movie clever, hoping that people would find this movie to be a work of art, hoping that people would consider him a genius, just putting in all of these different plot elements, putting in all of these different plot twists in an attempt to have this movie be seen as smart and clever, in an attempt to have him be seen as a subversive genius, something like that. And it's like, buddy, listen to me. You're not Christopher Nolan, okay? You don't need to be Christopher Nolan in order to have your movie be considered good. You could have very easily just made a dumb, fun action comedy, something stupid but entertaining, and call it a day, and I promise you, nobody, I repeat, nobody would get mad at you for making a movie like this in this day and age. This should be the least pretentious movie ever made, and yet it's not. This should be a perfect turn off your brain and have fun movie, and yet you are forced against your will to keep your brain on, because otherwise you're gonna have no idea what the hell is going on in this movie. I'm not watching an avant-garde Russian movie from the 1950s about World War I as told from the perspective of a dog. I'm watching a action comedy. Why is this movie's plot so hard to understand? Why? I'm not saying that comedies can't be smart or anything like that, because obviously, yes, comedies can be smart. It's very rare for a comedy to be smart, but yeah, smart comedies, they do exist. Not every comedy is a wacky, stupid, happy-go-lucky Adam Sandler, Jim Carrey slapstick fest. Obviously, yes, smart comedies do exist. The problem with Argyle, though, is that it has no reason to be a smart movie at all. It should just be a dumb, fun action comedy, and that's it. And yet, for some reason, it decides to go the extra mile in the worst possible way. Argyle is a stupid movie that desperately tries to be a smart movie, when it should instead just embrace the fact that it's a stupid movie. And ironically enough, the fact that it desperately tries to convince the audience that it's a smart movie only ends up making the movie even more stupid. And unfortunately for us, it's not the good kind of stupid. All I'm gonna say is, Matthew Vaughn better make the next fucking Empire Strikes Back with this movie. This movie better be the modern day equivalent to Terminator 2 Judgment Day. I want to apologize heavily for how long this segment is, but it is impossible for me to talk about why this movie is bad without having it be extremely long. This is just a bloated, cluttered movie, and so naturally this is how it would turn out. It is impossible for me to make a simple 5-minute review saying this movie is bad. No, this movie wants me to go into detail on why it's bad, and so I go into detail on why it's bad. And you want to know what the worst part is? There are still 2 movies remaining on this list. Their respective segments might not be as long as Argyle's segment, but they are far more painful movies, if you can believe it. And so we move on to the final 2 movies on this list. Let us proceed. Number 2 serves as a reminder that yes, we might be living in a golden age of video game adaptations, but the infamous video game curse still lingers on, and the following movie that we're about to talk about, I think, is the ugliest example of the video game movie curse yet. Number 2 is Borderlands. Now I'm going to admit something right off the bat. I have never played a single game in the Borderlands franchise. I know literally nothing about this franchise. I could not tell you a single thing about these games or its lore or anything like that. I am 100% unfamiliar with Borderlands as a game franchise. And yet, I still watch this movie, and I still think the movie is fucking awful despite that fact. Now, some of you might be wondering, why did I bother watching this movie if I've never played a single game in the Borderlands series? Good question. Well, you see, I saw that this movie debuted with a fucking 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, and that made me extremely curious to see how bad this movie was. And all I've got to say is, yeah, the movie is pretty damn bad. It is exactly as bad as the critics made it out to be. And the fact that I am completely unfamiliar with the source material should just tell you how bad this movie is. If someone like me that has never played a single game in the Borderlands series thinks this movie is awful, I cannot imagine what this movie is like to people that are actually fans of the Borderlands game series. I cannot imagine what that's like. I don't doubt that the Borderlands games are good. I have no idea. They are critically acclaimed, but I've also seen a lot of detractors for the franchise, so who knows how it'll turn out for me. But I feel like my opinions on Borderlands the game will have no effect on my opinions on Borderlands the movie. Simply put, this is the last airbender of video game movies, and I do not say that lightly. Whenever you think of the video game movie curse, you think of like a lot of like bad video game movie adaptations, and yeah, they're not great movies, but some of these movies are not really as bad as people make them out to be necessarily. You look at the Mario, Street Fighter, and Mortal Kombat movies from the 90s, and it's like, yeah, they're not great movies, but they're at least fun. You can enjoy them. The 90s Street Fighter movie is cheesy as hell, and yeah, it's not very good as a Street Fighter movie, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't fucking entertaining either. These aren't great movies, but at least you could have fun with them. There is no fun to be had with Borderlands. It is a completely joyless, miserable experience of a movie. I find it interesting how we went from a movie that had so many things wrong with it, and I mean so many things wrong with it, to a movie that is bad for one reason. But let me tell you something, this one reason is impossible to ignore when watching this movie. Again, I am not familiar with the Borderlands games, so I don't know if this movie is inaccurate to the games or not. I could not tell you at all. I am not the right person to tell you. I don't doubt the possibility that this movie has a lot of inaccuracies from the video game series. I don't doubt that there are a lot of things that are wrong in this movie when it comes to adapting the games, but I don't care how faithful this movie is to the original games or not, because there is one fatal flaw that ruins this movie, and that is the humor. Simply put, this is one of the unfunniest movies I have ever seen in my entire life. This movie is a perfect example of MCU humor at its absolute worst. At the very beginning, during the dishonorable mentions, I talked about Red One, and I briefly mentioned how MCU humor is a little bit weird in that sometimes it can be funny because of how unfunny it is, and other times it can be insufferable because of how unfunny it is. Red One falls into the former category. It's not a funny movie, but it is so unfunny that it somehow manages to turn around and become funny, but for the wrong reasons. This movie, in comparison, is a perfect example of the latter. It is insufferable how unfunny this movie is. I think Red One also has the advantage of having such a stupid, absurd storyline that it helps kind of add to the funny bad nature of the movie, whereas Borderlands is just Guardians of the Galaxy if it was bad. You watch this movie and it's very clear they're trying to copy the style of Guardians of the Galaxy, completely lacking everything that made those movies so good. It has the same sort of like misfit team thing, I guess. I don't know how to describe it, but I'm sure you know what I mean. You have all of these characters that have seemingly nothing in common with each other, and they're forced to team up together against their will. At first, they don't want to be together, but then as the movie progresses forward, they end up working together. They end up forming a friendship, I guess. I don't know. And they end up making a perfect team. This movie tries doing something like that, and it fails miserably. And that is largely because of how unfunny this movie is. I want to specifically focus on Jack Black's character, Claptrap, who I find to be particularly annoying in this movie. Again, I'm not familiar with the games, so I have no idea what this character is like in the original games, but holy shit, is this character annoying as hell in this movie. It's clear that this is supposed to be the comedic relief of the movie. He's supposed to be the comedic relief of the team, but god, every single scene that he's in, and he has a lot of scenes. I'm pretty sure like half of the movie consists of unfunny scenes from this character alone, and not once is it ever funny. Not once is this character ever funny. It feels like Jack Black is trying way too hard to make this character funny, and I mean way too hard. I almost want to laugh at any scene that this character is in, not because it's funny, but because I feel bad for the movie. That's the general vibe I get from this movie. This movie tries way too hard to make you laugh. It tries way too hard to be funny, and there's a part of you that wants to laugh at the movie, not because it's funny, but because you feel bad for it. you want to laugh at it out of pity. Either that, or you laugh at the movie not because it's funny, but because you're just desperate to laugh at something. This is a movie that desperately tries to make you laugh, but it's not funny, and so you start thinking of other things inside of your head, and that makes you laugh instead of the movie that you're watching. You're not laughing at the movie, you're laughing at something else you're thinking of in your head while watching the movie. And this is especially the case with the many, many unfunny scenes that Claptrap is in. And yet, despite all of this, I feel like Jack Black is the only person in the cast that's at least kind of trying. As I mentioned before, it feels like Jack Black is trying way too hard to make this character funny, but it also feels like he's the only one that's trying at all. Seemingly no one else is trying in this movie. It's like nobody wants to be in this movie. If I remember correctly, this movie went through some form of development hell, which is, third time's the charm, I guess. I think this movie was heavily affected by the pandemic, I'm not sure. To be fair though, this movie doesn't have the it went through development hell and it shows vibe that Megalopolis and Argyle had. I'm sorry, I refuse to believe that Argyle didn't go through some form of development hell. That's just impossible. There is no way development on Argyle started in 2021. I'm sorry, I refuse to believe that. But development hell or not, it doesn't matter because this movie is so insufferable with its comedy. It is so unbelievably unfunny. This movie is so bad, I wouldn't be surprised if there were people like me that are unfamiliar with the Borderlands game franchise and they were turned away by this series because of this movie. They refuse to play a single Borderlands game because of this movie. This movie suffers from what I like to call the has-been hotel effect, where it's like, this movie is a comedy, or at least it's trying to be a comedy, but then there are a few serious moments that are in this movie. So the main character of the movie, Lilith, I guess had a mom who died when she was a kid, and there's a scene late into the movie where she comes across an old hologram of her dead mom, and it's supposed to be like a sad moment in the movie, but the problem is you are unable to take it seriously because of how awful the humor is in this movie. You get reminded of how unfunny this movie is, and it completely ruins any chances of you taking this seriously. You look at the movie that Borderlands is very desperately trying to be like Guardians of the Galaxy, and you see like, yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy has funny moments in it, but it also has serious, sad moments in it as well, and you're able to take these slower emotional moments seriously because of how well the comedy is executed. I know that doesn't make much sense out of context. If the comedy in a movie is good, then that allows you to take the serious moments seriously. But would you take the emotional moments of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 seriously if the movie had the same style of humor as Thor: Love and Thunder? Exactly, that's what I thought. The Guardians of the Galaxy movies are some of the only MCU movies to not have the MCU-esque humor that the franchise is infamous for, and that allows you to take the emotional moments that are in these movies seriously. I've said this before and I'll say it again. If the comedy and the drama are both executed well, then you get to feel the respective emotions for both of them perfectly. You get to laugh at the comedy, and you get to take the drama seriously. When one aspect is done poorly, that affects the other aspect as well, regardless of how the other aspect is handled. If the comedy is done badly, then that ruins the drama, even if the drama is well executed, and vice versa. And then the movie also does the infamous thing where they have a sad moment and then they completely ruin it with an unfunny moment immediately after. So as it turns out, it's Claptrap that's providing the hologram of Lilith's dead mother, and as soon as it ends, we get more unfunny jokes from Claptrap, and God, it's like, they just don't want me to take it seriously, do they? Do you want me to take this seriously or not? Make up your in mind, please. When I finished watching this movie in theaters when it came out, I had to ask myself, was this the worst movie of 2024? I had to debate with myself, was this worse than the next movie on the list, or was it better? It was very hard for me to decide if this was the worst movie of the year or not, but ultimately, I decided to put this movie at number 2 for the simple fact that at least this movie has a couple mildly okay action scenes in it. There are a few action scenes in this movie that could be like 2% fun, I want to say. But mark my words, this is still an awful movie, regardless of if you're familiar with the Borderlands game franchise or not. I wish I was familiar with this game franchise because I feel like then I could go into more detail on why this movie is bad. I've seen a lot of people say that Cate Blanchett and Kevin Hart were miscasted in this movie, but I don't know anything about the original games. I don't know anything about the game version of these characters to verify that. I'm just going off of what I've heard. I don't know how faithful this movie is to the Borderlands games, but I feel like faithfulness doesn't matter when the movie is this f***ing unfunny. There is no fun to be had in this movie, plain and simple. If you ever wanted to know what Guardians of the Galaxy would look like if it had the same style of humor as Thor: Love and Thunder, this is the movie for you. All I'm gonna say is, please, for the love of God, let's not have history repeat itself. Please, God, please. And with that said, let us move on. Alright, so before we move on to number 1, I think it's fair that I give you a very quick recap of all of the previous movies that I've talked about on this list. Now, I am very well aware that this is a massive list, and I apologize for how long it is, but I do want to go into detail on why each and every single one of these movies were bad, and I feel like I've accomplished that. Before we move on to number 1, allow me to give you a quick recap of the previous movies that were talked about on this list. Dishonorable mentions go out to Red 1, Moana 2, Kraven the Hunter, and Y2K. And with that said, let us move on to the recap for the list proper. Number 15, Harold and the Purple Crayon. Number 14, Despicable Me 4. Number 13, The Crow. Number 12, Kung Fu Panda 4. Number 11, Madam Web. Number 10, Joker Folie à Deux. Number 9, Mufasa the Lion King. Number 8, Mean Girls. Number 7, Megalopolis. Number 6, Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate. Number 5, Saving Bikini Bottom, the Sandy Cheeks movie. Number 4, Emilia Perez. Number 3, Argyle. Number 2, Borderlands. And the number 1 worst movie of 2024 is Jerry Seinfeld's Unfrosted. Let me tell y'all a story, okay? Argyle was the first movie that I watched of 2024, and almost immediately after watching it, I proclaimed it to be the worst movie of 2024. And then I watched Madam Web, and then I considered that to be the worst movie of 2024. And then I watched Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate, and then I considered that to be the worst movie of 2024. And then I watched Unfrosted, and then I considered that to be the worst movie of 2024. Only this time, it stayed that way. Between all of the movies that I would watch between Unfrosted and the beginning of this list, none of them, not a single one of these movies, managed to be as bad as Unfrosted. None of them managed to dethrone Unfrosted as the worst movie of the year. Borderlands came dangerously close, but again, it's slightly redeemed by having a couple mildly okay action scenes in it. Unfrosted has nothing like that. All of the Joker 2s and Mufasas that I would subsequently sit through would be nowhere near as painful of an experience as sitting through Unfrosted. After I finished watching this movie, I was certain, for sure, this was going to be the worst movie of 2024. And imagine my shock when, by the end of the year, this movie still remained the worst movie I had seen in 2024. This is a movie from comedy legend Jerry Seinfeld. Now, I'm sure everyone watching this is familiar with Seinfeld the show. One of the greatest TV shows ever made, and maybe the only worthwhile thing Jerry Seinfeld has ever been involved with in his career. Sorry, Barry. Here he is, making his directorial debut with Unfrosted, a fictionalized retelling on how Pop-Tarts were made. This movie was part of the seemingly short-lived brand biopic trend that was going on around 2023 to 2024. In my original review of Unfrosted, I brought up how this seemed to be like the next big trend, seeing how superhero movies were dying out, only for there to not be a single brand biopic released after Unfrosted came out. There's a non-zero chance that Unfrosted ended the brand biopic genre that briefly existed in 2023 and 2024. As with many of the other movies that are on this list, I rewatched this movie. I was especially dreading rewatching this movie more than any other movie on this list, considering the fact that, again, this is number one. This is the worst movie of 2024, and maybe one of the worst movies I've ever seen in general. For comparison, the worst movie of 2023 for me was The Flash. I would rather watch The Flash over Unfrosted. Easily. Hell, I would rather watch The Flash over half of the movies that are on this damn list, honestly. If you looked past the elephant in the room of Ezra Miller being a terrible person, The Flash is just a painfully generic by-the-numbers superhero movie. It's a tiny bit watchable, I guess. Not a lot, it's not very watchable. Again, worst movie of 2023, don't get me wrong, but it is a very, very, very tiny bit watchable, which is more than I could say for half of the movies that are on this list. Gun to my head, I would rather watch The Flash over Joker 2. I would rather watch The Flash over Argyle. I would rather watch The Flash over Megalopolis. I would rather watch The Flash over Emilia Perez, and I sure as hell would rather watch The Flash over Unfrosted. This movie is supposed to be a comedy. It is not funny in the slightest. This might be the unfunniest movie I have ever seen in my entire life. I don't know how much sense this is gonna make, but this movie is unfunny for very different reasons when compared to why Borderlands is unfunny. And somehow I think this movie is even unfunnier than Borderlands, if you can believe it. This movie is somehow unfunnier than MCU humor. How the do you manage to make something that's unfunnier than MCU humor? I just don't know how to elaborate on how this movie is unfunny. This doesn't feel like a movie from 2024. That's the most that I could say about it. In my original review for this movie, I claimed that this felt like a really kids movie from like the early 90s, but rewatching this movie, I got more of this like crappy early 2010s made for TV Nickelodeon Disney Channel movie vibe from this, except that this is somehow a Netflix movie from 2024 that is from a comedy legend, that is from someone who was attached to one of the greatest TV shows ever made. And you want to know the funniest thing? You want to know something that is funnier than any of the jokes that are in this movie? Around the same time this movie came out, Jerry Seinfeld claimed that comedy can't be edgy anymore because of political correctness. He criticizes, I guess you could say, wokeness for being the reason why comedy is dead. Comedy can't be edgy anymore. Well, Jerry, if you want to retaliate against wokeness ruining edgy comedy, don't release this shitty movie that has zero funny jokes in it and is full of the squeaky clean humor I've ever seen in a movie. I mean, on the one hand, yeah, it would make no sense at all if a movie about how Pop-Tarts were made had a lot of edgy, offensive black comedy in it. But on the other hand, I'm sorry, you cannot complain about how comedy can't be edgy anymore because of wokeness and PC leftists and whatever, and then you go on to release this fucking Disney Channel movie that will just do nothing but completely destroy whatever point you're trying to make. I'm sorry, Jerry, but as far as edgy comedy goes, this movie leans much closer to Zack and Cody than it does to Blazing Saddles. What the hell is this, Jerry? What the hell is this? If it weren't for the complete lack of feet jokes in this movie, I would have thought that this was some Nickelodeon TV movie from the early 2010s. There you go, Jerry. There's an edgy, offensive joke right there. Are you happy now? Ironically enough, I think Jerry Seinfeld himself would be highly offended at me making such a joke, considering the fact that he and Dan Schneider really aren't all that different at the end of the day. Boom, 2 offensive jokes for the price of 1, just like that. I don't know if this movie was made as a genuine pushback against wokeness ruining edgy comedy or whatever, or if it was just an ill-timed coincidence. But either way, there's just something beautifully ironic about the fact that, like, the man who made this movie claims that comedy can't be edgy anymore because of wokeness, and then at the same time he's saying that he releases this movie that's on the same level of quality as those live-action Fairly Odd Parents movies from the early 2010s. There's something just beautifully ironic about that. That is funnier than any of the jokes that are in this movie. I don't know how I didn't notice this when I first watched this movie, but upon rewatch, I find this movie to be highly corporate in its nature. This is a movie about Pop-Tarts, obviously. This movie heavily focuses on Kellogg's. Kellogg's are the good guys in this story. And so naturally, you have appearances from a lot of Kellogg's mascots: Snap, Crackle, and Pop, Tony the Tiger, Toucan Sam, etc. And I can't help but feel weirdly disgusted by how blatant this movie is when it comes to, like, buy Kellogg's products. This movie makes me want to go to the grocery store and buy Pop-Tarts, you know? It reminds me of a certain other movie that I watched for the first time recently. What's that movie called? Let me see. You've probably never heard of this movie. It's a very obscure movie. Let me think from the top of my mind. Oh yeah, it's called Food Fight. You've probably never heard of this movie. It's very obscure. I watched Food Fight recently for the first time. I made an entire video on Food Fight explaining why it's bad. I don't care if I just rehash what everyone else has already said about Food Fight. I made my own video on it. And rewatching this movie, I was amazed by how many parallels there are between these two movies. Both movies focus on food, obviously. Both movies are extremely shameless when it comes to their product placement. Both movies have really bad, really unfunny food-related puns in them. Well, in Unfrosted's case, it would be bad cereal puns, but, you know, that still fits. Both movies have a surprisingly big cast, I guess you could say. Unfrosted has Jerry Seinfeld in it, obviously. We've already established that. But also Amy Schumer is in this movie, playing the main villain. I already brought this up in the Unfrosted review, but I'm gonna bring this up again. For better or worse, probably for better, I am unfamiliar with Amy Schumer's work. I have never seen a single Amy Schumer movie, except for Unfrosted. I am very well aware that she has a reputation for supposedly being very unfunny, and watching this movie, I can verify, yeah, she is unfunny, but I feel like it doesn't really matter when every character in this movie is unfunny. I see no reason to single out Amy Schumer for being unfunny in this movie when literally every character in this movie is unfunny, but I digress. Dean Norris, best known for playing Hank Schrader in Breaking Bad, makes a cameo appearance in this movie, who plays like this Russian leader, Russian soldier, I don't know. It's a very quick cameo. He only appears in one scene and that's it. You would think because haha Breaking Bad, whatever, this scene would be a little bit funny, but unfortunately no. This is one of the unfunniest scenes in the movie, which is saying something. Much like with Food Fight, I have no idea who the target audience for this movie is supposed to be. For most of the movie, this is trying to be a kid's movie. This is trying to be like a kid's movie. The problem is, what kid is going to find this movie funny. This movie takes place in the early 60s, and so naturally there are a lot of references to early 60s pop culture, most of which will most definitely fly over the heads of any kid that watches this movie. Maybe the 60s pop culture references are for the parents to enjoy, I don't know, but at the same time this movie feels too immature for adults to enjoy it. And so once again, for the final time, I have to ask, who the hell was this movie made for? Who the hell is the target audience for this movie? I don't think this movie would appeal to Jerry Seinfeld fans, given the fact that this movie is nothing like the kind of humor that Seinfeld has. I know that Seinfeld the show is considered funny because of Larry David, the co-creator of the show, and not because of Jerry Seinfeld himself. But still, imagine being a fan of Seinfeld, the show, and then you see this new movie that has Jerry Seinfeld in it, and you're like, oh, I can't wait to see what this is like. And what you end up getting is this unfunny garbage that feels like it's for babies, but like babies won't enjoy this movie. Who the hell is this movie made for? To give you an idea of how unfunny this movie is, there's this running gag throughout the movie where you have these milkmen that spy on Jerry's house for some reason. I'm pretty sure they explain it in the movie, but like, I don't know, I wasn't paying attention. I was just too busy focusing on how bad the comedy in this movie is. And then it all culminates with one of the milkmen kidnapping Jerry and taking him to this barn where he's being interrogated by the leader of the milkmen, played by Peter Dinklage. So there you go, another big name that's just attached to this movie for some reason. And then it ends with Jerry being forced to walk down the aisle, which is basically just a bunch of cow butts. And there's a lot of farting noises and whatnot, and this is Jerry Seinfeld's idea of edgy humor. Just think about that. The man who made this movie, the man who put this scene into his movie, claims that comedy can't be edgy anymore because of wokeness and political correctness and whatever, which is why he decides to retaliate by making this movie that has this f***ing iCarly tier humor in it that's disrespectful to iCarly, I apologize, and he just expects people to agree with the point he's trying to make, and instead, all he's gonna do is earn a lot of ridicule. Nobody is going to take his claim that comedy can't be edgy anymore seriously if he gives us this garbage. If I had never heard of Jerry Seinfeld before I watched this movie, and this movie was my introduction to his work, I would have a very, very hard time believing that in the 90s, this same man starred in what is widely considered one of the greatest, funniest, and most important TV shows ever made, even if he wasn't the reason why the show was good. I would just simply refuse to believe that. You could never be able to convince me that Seinfeld is a good, funny show, because that's how f***ing bad this movie is. I would have been on Team Friends for Life by default, just like that. You would never be able to successfully convince me that this man was in something funny at one point in his career. Jerry Seinfeld claims that comedy is dead because of PC leftists. And if that's the case, then all I have to say is, thank you PC leftists for ruining comedy. Yeah, we may never get any more movies like Napoleon Dynamite or Superbad in the future, but at least we will never get another movie like Unfrosted ever again, so, you know, try and look on the bright side of things. Thank you PC leftists for ensuring that we will never get another movie like Unfrosted ever again, hopefully. I felt personally insulted watching this movie, just looking at how unfunny it is, and that's made even more insulting when you combine that with the whole thing of like, this doesn't feel like a 2024 movie, this feels like an early 2010s Nickelodeon TV movie, and then you add in the whole claim from Jerry Seinfeld that comedy can't be edgy anymore, which is really ironic because there are zero edgy jokes in this movie, and it's no surprise at all why this movie is number one on the list. Ladies and gentlemen, Unfrosted, the worst movie of 2024, and one of the worst movies I have ever seen, period. Thank you everyone for watching this entire list. I know that this is a very long list and I apologize for that, but again, I wanted to go into as much detail as I possibly could on why these movies are all bad. Now that I've finally completed this entire list, I can finally move on to making more smaller scale videos, maybe, potentially, hopefully, I don't know. Feels like a massive weight was just lifted off of my back, you know? It feels really good, man. It feels really good. Anyways, that's about it. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to like, and if you're new to the channel, maybe consider subscribing, as it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you everyone for watching this video, and I will see y'all next time. Adios.